So there might be a couple more people coming in, but we'll get rolling as well. David Lublin is going to join us from New York at 12:30. And people, apparently there's 50 or so people watching online at the moment from Sweden and Berlin and the UK and other places. If you want to get online, the ACMI events Wi-Fi channel is what you need to go to, and Kubrick for Dream is the password. So you can log in there. You can log YouTube comments or do whatever else you might want to do. I'm going to go through a background, a little bit of VDMX, show some of my work with it, and examples of other work. We're going to leave on introductions to everyone until David joins us. It makes more sense maybe that he finds out the kind of relative experience and interest areas within VDMX that people are interested in, but he's going to be listening in for this half an hour as well. Okay, so I guess with that, I might get rolling with the setup. So there might be a couple more people coming in, but we'll get rolling as well. David Lublin is going to join us from New York at 12:30. And people, apparently there's 50 or so people watching online at the moment from Sweden and Berlin and the UK and other places. If you want to get online, the ACMI events Wi-Fi channel is what you need to go to, and Kubrick for Dream is the password. So you can log in there. You can log YouTube comments or do whatever else you might want to do. I'm going to go through a background, a little bit of VDMX, show some of my work with it, and more sense that he finds of experience and interests. Okay, so that'll be coming from my laptop. Okay, so I'm going to this is my VDMX interface here. I'm going to go through background history, but basically I've loaded it up with VDMX. Hi. So I've got my VDMX set up here. I'm going to leave breaking down of VDMX to David in half an hour. I'll talk a little bit about my setup here. And in my folder here, I've basically set up the equivalent of a PowerPoint presentation with a series of slides that I'm going to jump through. I can go to full screen or just show you the slides like this as well. And I might just start rolling on that. Okay, so vidvox.net is where you'll find VDMX. And in terms of learning the program and what it's about, the top 4 elements there break it down really well, or 3 particularly. There's a really extensive series of video tutorials available now that break down by topic how the program is structured and works. That hasn't always been there, but in the last 6 months there's been a lot of work with video workshops and tutorials, so these are really, really handy for understanding. The blog showcases a range of VDMX elements too, and the forum is a great learning place. VDMX was founded in 1998 as part of VidVox by Johnny D. Cam in the USA, who's still doing a lot of large projection-based and multimedia installation projects and touches in with VDMX from time to time. This is a recent review of mine of VDMX 5 in 2012. Going back to 2003, there was VDMX 4. And in 2002, VDMX 2 I reviewed. So 12 years of using this program, and there's still a lot to explore with it. A random video screenshot of samples of my work, a website, and various projects that I'm involved with. It generally involves some kind of live projection, sometimes with music, sometimes with theatre, sometimes with installations, and more recently with multi-screens and projection mapping, but a wide range of projects are possible with the kind of modular setup of VDMX. Generally, when I'm at an event, people will very quickly look at this interface and say, what software do you use? They're curious about knowing how you've made this stuff happen on the screen. Generally, I will say, well, actually, I use After Effects and Photoshop to generate a lot of graphics and video. And then I use VDMX, a combination of MadMapper and Quartz Composer, to generate and process that video in real time. Everyone here, I can see, or a few of the people I know here have a range of different kind of workflows, and some of those will involve VDMX and other programs. I enjoy that VDMX lends itself to integrating with other programs quite a lot. This is a snapshot of MadMapper. Basically, it allows you to align interfaces. It allows you to align images on projections, and you can send a signal directly from this via the GPU with an element called Siphon directly from VDMX. A sample of my VDMX interface and kind of breaking that down. Basically, it's a timeline, previews, clip bins, effects channels, and audio analysis, various plugins, but these can be configured in lots of different ways. So I'm going to go through and show a range of interfaces that show some of the ways people use this. Just different screenshots. But before that, just a refresher on some of these useful places for finding information. At vdmx.vidvox, a whole range of tutorials that are broken down really well. It's really extensive and broken down into these kind of areas, using media files, video generators, and live inputs, looking at how you get content into the software and then how you process that in different ways, and how you can control and automate that using two-channel mixers, sliders, controllers, etc. After you've downloaded the software and you've been playing around with it, you've been going through the tutorials, for a reference point, this is really excellent, wiki.vidvox.net. It has a really detailed list of information about the program. So if there's one particular thing that is troubling you, generally if you look in here, you'll find possibly an answer. And if that doesn't work, going to the forums will generally get a good kind of discussion going. There's quite a vigorous range, as you can see here, 12,000 posts of people discussing the various best ways to get the most out of this software. And one final look at exploring VDMX and ways to learn from it. They have a really nice series of built-in templates now. So when you change templates inside VDMX or change presets, all of the modules load up in a different way, and there are a lot of different ways of configuring the elements within it. So by default, these are the ones that they've got included, which range from basic mixing of clips through to experimental feedback, and other kinds of ways of using it. But each of those, even for people who are quite advanced, are worth looking at. If you go in and look at the different templates, you'll learn interesting ways that VDMX is capable of working. These are some screenshots from the Vidvox Museum of VDMX. So these are previous versions of VDMX. You can kind of see how the interface, I might full screen this, just a minute. So these are previous interfaces with VDMX. You can see very much a modular design is a strong part of it. Different ways of aligning. This is one of my former arrangements, and this was for doing live video for Gautier, touring around Australia with them. And I had two different channels. One channel was, if I clicked on the left-hand channel over there, media bin, this was for clips that needed to play and finish, and the other clips on the other side were ones that would play and loop, and I would jump between these as I was working through a song, and would do that on stage with the band and wait for certain cues and then hit the certain clip. Recently in Tasmania, sending out a 3-screen setup so that on the left-hand side, that's actually lots of 4x3 images that were going out onto 2 shipping containers, and another image that was going out onto projected on a different area. With the 3-channel arrangement, I had 3 different media bins, and I'm choosing which clips go on which parts of the kind of architecture around us, and I can arrange that once I know the setup and build a custom interface in VDMX to suit that kind of workflow. Another kind of just playful setup. And these are still mine. Using, on the left-hand side, bottom, you can see a custom quartz patches. So a strong aspect of VDMX is the capacity to integrate Quartz Composer inside VDMX. So if you build something in Quartz Composer and you expose some of the parameters of Quartz, They can appear directly as interface elements in VDMX on the left-hand side. So I've named them things like dog on and off, and that would turn this sprite of a dog on and off within the Quartz composer and move that around. Again, a different multi-screen thing. And these are some by other people. Oh no, actually that's mine. That's a flashback to their older software, Grid Pro. Another Grid Pro, VDMX. Here we can start to see more different arrangements. People might want to match something to their controller, or they might have specific use cases where they want lots of vertical control elements, etc. I think this, from memory, this is looking at the wave clock. It's one of their templates. A feedback control. So you can get the general idea. It's a very modular interface. There are lots of different elements within VDMX that can be put together. David Lublin is going to be joining us pretty soon, and he'll explain how these go together. But I very much enjoy the program for that capacity, to be able to bring in different elements for a different show. I'll briefly show a video if we've got time. This is a recent video that was developed with a range of programs, one of them being Unity, the 3D gaming software. And so that was generating textures and worlds, and through the Siphon protocol, it was sending video from there to VDMX. The VDMX interface here was set up so that it was taking that signal in and applying feedback loops to it and generating this interesting kind of effect. Let's bring the actual video up. I'm going to go out of full screen for a minute to see this. I'll just leave this running for a little bit more until we see the person running and you start to get a better idea of the feedback and the way that it's coming from one program into another. But you can watch the rest of that in your own time. But we'll just let it get to at least a little punchline. And how about we play that at full speed? Okay, that was a clip called Data. I won't play the clips, but I will briefly show you some of the other users. Momo the monster. So these are users that are profiled on the VDMX site. They show how VDMX integrates to a range of software and hardware in a large-scale event, and how it fits into their workflow. So they're kind of interesting examples to have a look at. This is an artist called Weirdcore, who works with Aphex Twin in the UK. And he works with Max MSP and Jitter and VDMX, and integrates lights a lot in his show, and very feedbacky, glitchy kind of effects. But again, profiled on the VDMX site, and you can have a look there. In case David Lublin couldn't make it, and we're going to cut to him shortly, I did have a brief puppet version that we could check out.
Hi. In this video tutorial, I'm going to go through 3 different ways to output video from VDMX, and these are the 3 most common ways you'll probably have to do for VJing and live video production. So starting from a new...
And with no further ado, I think that's probably a good point for us to cut to David Lublin if we're ready to switch across.
Yeah, I'm good. You've got me.
Okay. Hi, David. Welcome to the Southern Hemisphere.
How's it going? Is it warmer there than it is here?
It's pretty cool in here at ACMI. We're looking. We've got about 12 people. I'm not sure if we can cut to a camera feed that'll maybe give you an idea of who's here. But we're going to pass the microphone around shortly, and we're going to get everyone to briefly introduce the level of experience with VDMX and their particular interest with it. So maybe we'll start that process off.
Hello, David.
Can we get the camera to follow them?
Yeah, we're just setting that up in a second, and
awesome.
Switching their mic on as well. So
Hello. Hello, David.
Hi.
So my name is Martin. My experience is not a lot. I've been using the software for about 3 years, introduced to it by Sean. And mostly I just use video footage that I make elsewhere and sort of just do live mixing and jamming with bands that I'm in. So my goals of being here is a bit more inspiration. I definitely want to integrate some quartz and I use a bit of audio reactive, just the basic audio analysis stuff, but I want to get a bit more specific with that. Maybe I play upright bass, so I'd like to be able to trigger things frequency-wise maybe, but yeah, I still feel like an absolute infant in the VDMX world. So
Yeah, I usually ask people to rate their level of knowledge from 0 to infinity, which, it's a little bit hard to judge sometimes.
Sure. That's how it feels every time I go on the wiki and start to go from link to link to link trying to learn. It's like, wow, it's so huge. But
there's a lot of depth, yeah. Well, you'll get some good tips tonight.
Cool. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jono, or VJ Drop Bear. I've been using VDMX. I've been using VDMX for how many years? Since 2002. I actually got into it when I was doing a theatre show, and we had to figure out a way to project images. I'm not a heavy user of it. I don't do visuals a lot, but I work closely with one musician, and we have a really synchronized show. He's running VDMX on his laptop via Ableton, and I'm from more of an animation kind of background. I'm more of a compositor, animator, not so much a programmer. So a lot of my stuff's pre-made, and I'm trying to tweak VDMX to be more of a real intuitive performance tool on stage, because I'm on stage with the audio guy, and I really want it to be. My goal is to not actually touch the computer, to actually control it entirely from a Surface controller. So yeah, that's my goal.
That's a very good goal. Getting away from the computer is probably the most important thing you can do. Even if it requires using like 2 or 3 MIDI controllers at once, it's kind of worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm currently using an iPad, a Fader Fox, and a mini ACMI. So I've got 3 things running, and I'm still using the mouse, which is not ideal, but we'll see.
One quick question: what things do you still use the mouse for?
I use the mouse for cycling through effects, like getting all the parameters in my effects, changing the parameters in effects, and what else? Sometimes triggering clips, because I don't have a big grid, and I sometimes get confused of where I am on the grid, and I don't have feedback coming on. My controller doesn't allow you to turn on which grid you're on, so which pad you're on. So
is that the Kai or the?
Yeah, the ACMI, and the Fader Fox doesn't do it either. Yeah.
Oh, you can get the button. Is it which Akai is it?
It's the mini one, the little tiny one that looks like a keyboard. It's got like 8 pads on it. I don't know what it's called.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I know which one you mean. Yeah.
A BP8, apparently Martin said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, that's all. Carry on.
Hey, I'm Matt. I've used VDMX for about 3 years and done some audiovisual performances here in Australia and in the States using Ableton and some like guitar and live audio reactive input and stuff. Used some of the VADE plugins as well, which I really like. And I use it to just kind of jam with video inputs as well and output stuff through Siphon as well. But yeah, I'm just kind of here to hear what you've got to say today and maybe, yeah, hear about whatever.
You'll pick up little things.
Hello, I'm Sebastian. Well, I'm very new in this, like, for just 1 year, like doing like projections. I make my own footage and I try to start to like get more in the like how to make like a more a professional level. So yeah, I just come here to be more information about it.
Hi. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm well. My name's Casey. I've done a few shows for bands using Max and NATO back in the 90s and been a long-time Max user and been teaching Max at the local university here a little bit lately and just finding Jitter's video playback to be somewhat inferior. So I'm looking for ways to get better playback out of it without having to do everything. So I'm kind of interested in just siphoning over stuff from Max and playing it off, displaying it with VDMX and hoping that will cure my big video woes because it's not doing so well.
There is a jitter plugin for playing back cap videos now.
Yeah, the last time I was working on something, I started getting into it, and I just thought, well, Sean was doing this thing. I thought I'd just drop in and see what he's up to.
Yeah.
I've known him for a while, and so interested in seeing where it's at. I kind of knew Johnny a long time ago when he was starting out making this, so it's nice to see it's all happening.
I figured when you were saying that you were using NATO that it's kind of this small of a community that you probably knew Johnny back then.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a special thing then, and now it's kind of like a common technology, and it's just kind of interesting to see what other people are doing with it and the VJ people are doing with it. And
yeah.
if I can't squeeze a bit more out of Jitter because it's kind of lacking at the moment, I think.
I slipped in there when Soft VNS was kind of the best thing to use in Max.
Yeah.
I missed that.
I've built a few installations for people, like bigger ones for artists here, and I'm just got to see what's out there. I'm kind of finding Jitter's falling on flat a bit sometimes and want to see what other things I can use. So here I am.
Cool.
Hi there, my name's Lindsay. I've had a history of doing VJing basically from 1999, where I was creating content to play on VHS tapes and two-channel mixing. I think I did two-channel mixing until about 2005 using things like Motion Dive and, basically got as far as I could. And I think now I'm just, I've had VDMX for a couple of years and I haven't used it. I basically do a lot of narrative works in animation and compositing. I'm an experienced After Effects user. So because I really want to look at the real-time aspect of generating imagery because I'm really used to thinking in terms of compositing and producing work that is linear. So I'm interested in seeing how the software works and what other people are using it for. So that's why I came along today. Thank you.
Hey, my name's Bob. I do various audio-visual things. VDMX is my go-to VJ tool. I've got a mouseless setup, pretty much. The one thing that I need a mouse for is selecting compositing modes. But other than that, all mouseless. I do lots of stuff in Max and develop some tools for Ableton called Visible, some video tools. And yeah.
Cool.
Hi, my name's Toby. My background's mainly in lighting, but that's since moved into doing a lot of video type work. I'm very inexperienced in VDMX, even though I've sort of played with it on and off in the last couple of years. Mostly use sort of bigger, more expensive media servers, that type of thing, but I really like the interactive side of VDMX, so I'm sort of interested in starting to go down that path. I do a lot of content creation for some music stuff, but also a lot of big corporate things, using things like Catalyst and Watch Out, that type of stuff. So more interested in the performance side now and sort of using my skills as a lighting operator more than just pressing a button cue to cue during some kind of event.
Hi, my name's James. My background is all kinds of video technology. I started VJing with VHS tapes and MX50s and moved on to Grid Pro and now using VDMX for a few years. Yeah, just want to learn more about it, really.
Hi, my name's Jason. I only use VDMX really a couple of times a year, really, when I'm working with James on a couple of festivals. We sort of mainly just trigger, you know, video content, but also looking at live input from cameras and things like that and trying to get effects on that. And yeah, just want to get a bit more insight into the, you know, a further, you know, deeper understanding of what it can do.
Okay, thanks for the introductions, everybody. I think now it's over to you, David. We've got about 50 plus viewers tuning in online, and we'll get to their questions at the tail end. We'll monitor the stream and grab questions for you, and maybe you'll see that yourself. But it's over to you for the next couple of hours, so take that however you like. And,
cool. And yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
In terms of questions, I guess we're keenest to have you deliver as much as you can, and we'll try and leave questions mostly to the end. But there might be some particularly useful questions occasionally that are really relevant, and we'll pass the microphone around in that case and get people to discuss them with you.
That was exactly what I was about to say. If there are any questions, just please, you know, let me know, and I'll slow down for a second and we can cover them. And thank you for that great introduction. I was especially pleased to see that you used VDMX to do the introduction instead of Keynote or something like that. I guess it's kind of one of the weird things you can do with it that's not like VJing. And that was kind of nice to see. So usually the way that I like to start off by showing VDMX is by going through kind of more the very fundamentals video. Oh, I'll hide Skype so you guys don't have to see things. You don't have to see yourselves, rather. And there I am in my screen, because once again, I can do all of this just straight from VDMX. So I usually just like to go through kind of the fundamentals of actual video processing, and then through that, touching on all of the different little elements of VDMX. So when you're working on with video, there you start off with having some sort of a source material, and those source materials usually fall into one of three categories. You've got like live cameras, which I have active right now. Then you could have you know, pre-rendered material animations or movies that you've recorded, and then after that you've got like interactive things, so Quartz Composer patches or core image generators. Recently we added a new type, which maybe you guys haven't really played with. They're called ISF. And I'll just, you know, activate one of those, and now you'll lose me for a second, but you get this, you know, interactive gradient where you can kind of shift things around and, you know, change the colors of them on the fly. So the first thing I'll just show off here is that you've got this layer source menu. And I could just pick live camera again. So most of the things that happen in VDMX, as far as building your setup, happen in this window here called the Workspace Inspector. And it's broken up into a few different tabs. And the first one is called, that we're going to look at, is called Layers. And layers in VDMX work pretty much like layers in Photoshop. You could have this plus button adds an extra layer. You can rename them, so I can call this one my live input, because I'm always going to want to leave that on live camera. And I can call this other one, you know, something else like interactive, because it's going to be my interactive layer. You can drag them to rearrange the order. And you click on them and it shows these sub-inspectors. All of these sub-inspectors, some of them have these little icons in the top right. And if you click those, it opens them up into their own window. So I've just opened up the controls for the source controls for the interactive layer. And it has this use source menu. And from there, I can just grab any of my inputs. So if I want to grab an ISF generator that appears over that, I just pick it from that menu. If I wanted a core image generator, I could pick, you know, now I've got bar graphs that render in front of me. And I can, you know, since this is an interactive generator, I can make these bar graphs go up and down, stuff like that, and whatever. And above that, since it's an interactive generator, above that, I have the ability to actually specify what size I wanted to render at. So for my live camera, it's actually forced. I can't edit. If I switch over to the workspace inspector here, my built-in camera is always coming in at 1280 by 720. I can't actually adjust that. But for my bar graph, I can click over here and switch it to be 1280 by 720, and now it's stretched across my whole canvas area. So when I say canvas, what I'm talking about is the very topmost element in the Workspace Inspector's layer section is this canvas main output. And if you click on that, you get the controls for what we call the canvas. So it's like you have a big sheet of paper, all of your layers get drawn inside of there. So actually I'm rendering everything right now at 1920 by 1080, and all of my layers are scaling up to that size. In fact, I can just really quickly show off. One of the things in the sub panels is the live input composition panel. So I'll pop this open into its own window just to demonstrate a quick thing. So here we have the ability to adjust, the X position of a layer. I can adjust the Y position and move it up and down. I can make my layer narrower or, squish it down. Then we have this sizing mode menu, which lets you deal with the different ways that a layer is stretched to fill out over the canvas. So if I have my bar graph and it's actually, let's say, 640 by 480, which, it's in a smaller section of my output, if I go into its layer compositions and I switch it into fill mode, it'll actually try and blow everything up so that it fills across my entire canvas. It only really comes into play when you have an aspect ratio mismatch. So if I go back to having 1280 by 720 for that layer, fill mode just knows, okay, I don't have to actually do any stretching. It's the right aspect ratio. I just need to blow it up. The next fill mode, though, if I switch back to 640 by 480 here, is, so when I do fill mode, things spill off the screen and it doesn't really work very well. It can sometimes, but for this, it doesn't really work. So if I switch into stretch mode, you'll see that everything now is just stretched out to fill across my canvas. And the text looks a little bit stretched out, but it's kind of a little bit close enough for this kind of content. The last mode is called copy, and what that does is it actually shows things at their pixel resolution. So now my bar graph, which is 640 by 480, is drawing actually pixel by pixel for its at 640 by 40 within my 1920 by 1280 canvas. Likewise, if I go to my live input, there it is, and I switch that into copy mode, since it's only 1280 by 720, it's actually drawing it smaller inside of my canvas. The other controls that are useful right here are the position mode. So when I was moving the X slider back and forth, I'll just switch this back up into fit mode. So I can push myself all the way off screen, but sometimes you want to make it so that you're like docked on the side of screen. So I'm going to just shrink this down. And again, I can push myself all the way off screen. And sometimes that's a desirable behavior. But other times you just want to be able to like dock it at the side of the screen. So there's this position mode option, and it adjusts the range on your X position. So now when I go all the way to 0 or all the way to 1, it actually docks me on screen. And this can be really useful when you're trying to animate these sliders, and or just control them in whatever. So if you're using like a MIDI controller or anything, you can limit the range of these things. So the next thing I'll just show off, we'll make all of this stuff big again, the right size. So fit, bring that up to size. There we go. And bring that to fit again. Oop. I could have actually also just went and made my canvas to 1280 by 720, which is probably the right thing to do. If you know what size you're going to be working at, you can just kind of, whenever possible, you work at the right resolution and you get the best performance. Now that I've got these two layers going here, I've got this interactive layer actually on top of my video, but right now they're actually blending together. It's using an additive blend mode. In the composition controls, if I open this up into its own window, for the layer on top, I've got my interactive composition. I'm going to switch it from being in additive mode to OpenGL over mode. And now my graph actually is rendering in front of me. Oh, and you can see that there's actually a little bit of where the, there's no actual opacity where the text is, so I can actually see behind the text there. I should probably go through and fix that patch. Bye. So VDMX supports alpha channels, for those of you who understand what alpha channels are. And for those of you who don't, let's do a quick introduction. So every pixel that renders, you think of it as every dot has a red, green, and blue value associated with it that defines what its color is. On top of that, you have something that's called its alpha channel, which describes how invisible that pixel is. So if I switch my interactive layer from this bar graph over to, let's say, my linear gradient, now that's completely blocking out what's behind it, and I can adjust the colors of them. And the last slider on here is the alpha channel of the color. So as I lower that down, the pink part becomes more transparent, but the blue part is still completely opaque. I can't see through it no matter what there. It blocks me out. And if I want the blue part to be partly invisible, I can then just sort of fade that down as well. Interactive control generators aren't the only things that support alpha channels, though. So movies can also. And one of our sample packs is this one right here. And some of these are actually labeled with alpha. So I'm going to trigger these to my interactive layer. Or I can make a new layer and call it movie. That's what we'll do. Along with the ability to adjust the blend mode, there's right below that your layer opacity and a hide button. So if I just want to hide a layer, I can fade it out with its opacity slider. Or I can hit the hide and show button and it actually works as a toggle. So you can hard block something out. So before to load in these video files, sorry I went through that a little bit quickly, I went into my browse import media window, which gives you this like floating window. And you can either use it to browse your hard drive or you could save favorites in here. And then loading files is just as simple as dragging things from here, either into the table of contents section on the side or into a media bin page itself. Or you could just drag files in from the Finder directly if you want to go that route. And if you need to find these files, you can just right-click on them and choose, Reveal Selected in Finder. And there's a bunch of other useful things in here as well. So if you want to find this clip, there it is. It's this clip there. Then, once you've got clips loaded into a media bin, you just need to pick what layer you want to trigger it onto. So if I want to play it on my movie layer, I would choose the movie layer and then click on a file. And right now the movie layer, which is at the topmost one, it's in additive mode by default. So here, let's open that up into its own window. And it's actually playing additively on top of me. If I switch it into over mode, it completely blocks me out because this particular file doesn't have any alpha channels embedded in it. But the next file, which does, you can see it actually now that it's in over mode, certain pixels render in front of me, and other ones you can see transparently through me. So this movie has alpha channels encoded in it. Over here, when a movie is playing back, we can see in the source control section, I'll pop that into its own window. When a movie is playing, we have kind of standard movie playback controls. So there's a movie scrub slider here. You can just click on it and drag if you want to scrub through a movie. You've got a standard play pause button, so if you want to pause a movie. Above that, you've got the ability to set in and out points with these two buttons there. So I want to just loop a little section of it. And then next to that, you've got these reset buttons. And then below that, you've got this rate slider. So if you want the movie to go backwards or play forwards even faster. So kind of standard controls there. Then there's just a quick button for like reversing the rate. Sometimes you just want things to go backwards, but at the current pacing that it's going. This movie doesn't have any audio, but if you have a file that has audio, those play as well. And there's a volume slider. And then below that, it's just a regular kind of standard mute button. If you have multiple audio interfaces connected, below the mute button is this option where you can specify what audio output you want to use. And then below that, if you're using an audio device that has multiple audio channels of output, multiple stereo pairs, you can pick them from this menu. So for example, if you're outputting over Soundflower's 64 option, you get this giant list of all of the available stereo pairs for outputting. And that can be useful in a lot of weird cases. But most of the time, you're just going to use your system default output as far as that's concerned. And then you've got kind of a standard loop mode setting. So if you want your clips to be in reversing loop and ping pong back and forth, reversing loop is what you want. If you need your clip to cut to black at the end, kind of a standard behavior, cut to black, we'll wait a second, and there the clip cut out. The next option below that is, of course, called hold, and that just sticks on the last frame. Sometimes you want that behavior. So those are both options in there. But the default is for a clip to just keep looping over and over again, kind of forever. Next to the loop mode is this scratch slider, and if you click on that, it does like a relative scrub, which can be kind of useful if you want to think of it more as like pressing down on a turntable and then scratching back and forth. That's what the slider is for. And then directly above that, you've got these controls for just jumping back by a second, or you can also specify that you want to jump back by a specific number of frames. So if you want to be able to step through a movie. And then there's also an option for specifying jumping around in terms of beats. So if you're using the clock plugin and you have, it's running at 120 BPM right now, and I say I want to jump back by exactly 1 beat, so it jumps back by half a second because I'm at 120 BPM. We'll talk more about BPM shortly and all that other fun stuff. So I've got this live camera running in the background, and if you guys are all following along on your computers, you can, I'll just do a quick new project. And when you start from a new project in VDMX, you kind of just get a media bin and a default layer. If you want some video to show up there really quickly, you can just pick from your layer source the FaceTime camera, and it'll take a second, and there it comes up. And if you don't actually have any movie files on your computer, the next tab in the Workspace Inspector that I'm going to talk about real quick is the plugin section. So the plugin section lets you add lots of little modules to your app, to your project setup. So the first one I'm going to add is called Preview, and it just gives you this little floating window here. And from this pop-up menu, you can pick what layer or source you want to preview. So if I want to just preview my straight camera feed, I can choose that. If I want to preview what my layer looks like, I can choose it there. So right now it just shows whatever's on there. But one of the sections here is effects. So if I want to see what this layer looks like being processed, here let's add a zoom blur, and there we get all this crazy zoom blurring going on. So I can choose between whether or not I want to preview my raw camera feed. I can preview what's looking on layer 1 without any effects on it, which is just my live camera feed. Or I can preview the layer with the effect applied. Or I could preview the actual main output as it's being sent to the screen in this box down here. So now that we've got a little bit of a preview going, that's pretty useful. You can also adjust the opacity once it's previewing a thing. So I'm looking at the main output right now, and as I click on and drag on the slider up here in the preview window, you'll see that it's actually fading my output in and out. And it's also being matched by this master fader slider in the Workspace Inspector. And these two sliders move in tandem because it's actually the same slider. And the other useful thing in the preview window is this menu in the top left corner, which lets you throttle the frame rate. So if you want it to actually update really quickly and smoothly, you can choose 30. And if you're kind of worried about performance, you could drop it down to 10 frames per second and get a less smooth output on just the preview window, but it gives a higher priority to your main output. The next plugin I just want to show off is called Movie Recorder, and this lets you record actual video clips. So I'm going to record from my FaceTime camera, and you can do this as well if you don't have any video clips already on your computer that you want to play with. When you're recording, in the Workspace Inspector, after you've added a Movie Recorder plugin, you'll see that there's a sub-inspector here as well, and pretty much every plugin has this sub-inspector window in the Workspace Inspector. So like Media Bin, here's all the sub-inspector options that you can go through for that. Previews as well have a whole bunch of little things you can do in settings. But we're going to look at the Movie Recorder really quickly. So the first option that's in here is called Video Codec, and that just determines what format the video file records into, what codec to use. So we usually recommend if you're doing real-time recording using either Apple Intermediate or Photo JPEG, simply because those are formats that can actually be recorded into real time. If you're on a really fast hard drive, you can try using the uncompressed option. If you're on a very fast hard drive and a very fast computer, you can try recording directly into HAP, but it usually doesn't keep up in real time. But I'll talk a little bit more about codecs in a minute. So to start, I'm just going to choose Photo JPEG, and there's an option to record the quality setting. I'll set it to normal maybe. And you could also set it to throttle the frame rate so that you can get a movie at a very specific frame rate. And then by default, it records at the native resolution of whatever feed you're sending it. But if you want, you could also specify that you want it to be cropped in 640 by 480 or something along those lines. Below that, there's an option to record audio. If you enable that, you get this option here for choosing which audio source you want to record from. So I'll choose built-in microphone. Below that, you have this option for whether or not you want it to automatically import clips into your media bin once you've recorded them. So I'm going to leave that on right now. And then these other options here are just useful little ones. I'll touch on that later if we get around to it. And so now, to record, I just hit record video, click that button there, and wave, and I hit stop, and now a movie is loaded there into my media bin. And if I want to find it on my computer, I can just, once again, reveal files in Finder, and here's the movie file that I recorded. To trigger a file, since I've only got this one layer going on, I can just click on that, and hit that button there, and wave, record video, click that button. So now we've got, instead of myself on layer 1, the live feed, add this live back in there so you can see me all the time. I don't know if it's helpful to whoa, that's a little bit weird, isn't it? I don't know if it's useful to actually see me all the time. I could just set this preview there. How about that? Is that good? Now you can see me, and I don't have to have this weird double vision of me. Although this could be kind of a really fun performance too. I don't know if that's too weird for everybody. All right, I'll stop. So I've recorded this video of myself, and if you're using your computers there, I would recommend following along. I don't know if you guys are. Let's see, if I switch over to Skype, hey, look, I can see you guys. That's really that's a lot more fair. And you can see me looking at you, right? Great. So, and so I can actually kind of drag through this movie now. And since this one does have audio, click that button there. I can show you how the actual volume slider works now. So I've got this movie. I can scrub around within it. And the next thing I wanted to show off is, so I've recorded this movie. And when I'm playing it back in VDMX right now, it's using 25% of my CPU for this photo JPEG movie that I've recorded. And it's a 1280 by 720 movie. So one of the things that we released last year was a new video codec called HAP. And the idea was that we wanted to be able to make computers that have very fast hard drives, like solid state drives. Sorry, I just have to pause this video of me yelling. All of the new Retina MacBook Pros, all of the new Mac Pros really come with solid state hard drives now, which are very, very fast. But when you're playing back video files, it can still be very CPU intensive, especially if you're playing back HD files. I guess I have to leave this loading, otherwise the CPU usage doesn't change. So when you want to play back a lot of HD files, it kind of stacks up very, very quickly. You can only play back so many things in photo JPEG at a time. Here, let's load in some other ones, and that way I don't have to look at myself constantly. So I've got one layer of that going. Let's try and max this out. These are all photo JPEG. I'll just keep adding layers until it stops working, basically. So layer 3, layer 4. Now you can see my CPU usage is kind of maxing out at about 100% with photo JPEG. The frame rate just starts to drop. So you can play back about 4 layers of HD photo JPEG, and that's kind of a bit of a letdown. So, because this is a really fast computer. I'm going to load in the HAP versions of these same files, and we'll try it again. So right now we're looking at, for this one file that's playing back, hide that, hide the movie recorder now. So for this one layer of photo JPEG that's playing back, it's about, 34% of CPU usage. And this clip is the very first clip. So now I'm going to play back the HAP version of it, and the CPU usage drops to 17%. So let's see how many layers of HAP we can now do. I'll just add, let's see if we can do 6. One of the cool tricks you can do in the media bin here is I'm going to go into, if you click the magnify glass in any window, it automatically brings it in the workspace inspector. Very useful thing. So I click the magnifying glass in the media bin, and one of the options here is you can choose how, what happens when you trigger something. So right now, if I trigger it stays on layer 1 as my next one. I'm going to change this auto layer setting to cycle so that it'll trigger on layer 1. And now it's updated this menu automatically to layer 2. So I can just kind of go through. So layer 2, it's going to trigger here, layer 3, layer 4, layer 5, and 6. So I'm now playing back 6 layers of HD video, and where with Photo JPEG I was kind of maxed out at 4, now it's using 34% of my CPU usage. The downside of using HAP clips is that they're very, very big, so you need a very fast hard drive to play them back. Excuse me. So I've got this clip that I recorded, and it's in Photo JPEG right now. How do I convert it to HAP? So I'm going to do Reveal Files in Finder. And if you're still running before Mavericks, you can open up these files and preview them in QuickTime Player. In Mavericks, they made it so you can't use any you can't use third-party codecs in the newest version of QuickTime Player. So I recommend either using this program that I like to use called Qt Amateur, which is a free app from Mike Ash. And also we have a free batch converter on the VidVox site called VV Batch Exporter that has a whole bunch of options in there as well. Let's see if I can bring that up. VV Batch Exporter looks like this, and you can drag in a file, and then you go over here and you choose settings, and you pick what video settings you want. So you click here, and then you've got all of the actual video codecs are installed on your computer. So HAP comes in 3 different varieties. There's HAP, and then there's HAP alpha. So if you have a computer-generated video that has alpha channels, this is the codec the version of it that you'd use. And then there's HAP Q, and that's just a higher quality version, but the CPU usage is a little bit higher, and it's even bigger file size. So usually you want to go with the HAP codec, and if you're using alpha channels, use HAP alpha. And if you've used HAP and the quality just doesn't seem right, there's sometimes some weird artifacting, same like you might get with any codec. In certain situations, it just doesn't work particularly well. In that case, you might want to try using HAP Q. So I'm just going to choose HAP and go with medium quality, and then hit OK. I'm going to turn off the prepare for internet streaming because it's not, you certainly don't want to use HAP for streaming things on the internet. And I'm going to remove the soundtrack, but if you want that on there, you just toggle it, and I'll just turn that off. And then if you're using our batch exporter, it gives you the option to like remove a little chunk from the end and then automatically append like a little text on the beginning. And then you can also choose a directory to save it in. So I'll go to my desktop and save it there. And I hit export, and here we go. Now I've got the HAP version of this file. So bring that in here and just drag it in. So as a quick comparison, go back and forth between these. I'll go and delete all these extra layers that I have. So Photo JPEG version of this, 23%, and the HAP version, about 18%. So there's a little bit of a savings there with this file. But actually kind of a pretty noticeable one. Yeah. So depending on the codec you're using, the worst quality Photo JPEG, you can get by a little bit, but usually if you want to play back lots and lots of HD, HAP is the way to go. And Qt Amateur is also a great little one to use. It just has this batch export window where you load things in and drag them. And then you get the same sort of settings window where you can choose what codec you want. And HAP is great for that. But typically when you're making videos for VDMX, we recommend using either Photo JPEG, Apple Intermediate. They're both great choices. They look good, and they've got a nice balance of hard drive space versus CPU versus quality. And if you're just playing back way too many files at once, HAP is the way to go after that. You definitely don't want to use H.264 unless that's really the only option that you have. But if you are going to go that way, you really want to set every frame as a keyframe. Otherwise, it makes it so you can't really scrub through movies. So, are there any just quick questions about movie playback or anything along those lines from people who are sitting there, actually?
Yeah, we've got one question. We'll get a microphone to them in a sec.
Just has this batch.
The question was about whether HAP is included in Mavericks, or where does it come from?
HAP comes from us. It installs with VDMX, and then once it's installed, it'll show up in the batch exporter, any of those standard codec windows. So after you've installed VDMX, you have HAP on your computer. And HAP is actually, it's open source, so it's supported by a number of different applications at this point, including there's a jitter plugin for it, and I forget who else supports it. Oh, there are a bunch. I think if you go to the HAP GitHub page, there's a nice list of them there. GitHub.com / yeah, I can't type at all, can I? /vidvox /HAP. So if you know any software that doesn't support HAP yet, it's open source, and it's great because once you convert the files into this format, it doesn't matter if you're using VDMX or something else. So it's supported in VDMX and Koji, which is a Quartz Composer-based app, and there's the jitter version. And then a lot of Cinder-based applications like BlenDVJ, I think, supports it natively. And there's actually a Windows port in the works, so people who are using Touch Designer for work are starting to use it as well. So yeah, and a lot of the video clips that we upload as sample clips to our website are also already encoded in HAP, so you can just use them directly. But it's not such a big deal to have to convert them as well. Yeah.
I just noticed a comment on the YouTube comment. Someone wrote, "I kind of like the artifacting in HAP." Any comment?
The what? Oh, he likes the artifacting in HAP?
Yeah.
Actually, that's kind of funny. Actually, so one of the sets of effects that people really like are the Datamosh plugins, which do fake H.264 compression. And a friend of mine is trying to reproduce old MPEG-2 video compression because he really loved the way that it looked. It had this kind of very blocky, specific thing and he had this way of hacking his old TiVo to work that way. And now he's trying to find a way of digitally recreating that. So maybe we need to have a way of like exacerbating fake HAP so you can apply it to a real-time video feed or something like that if you really like that compression. We think that I'm not a fan of compression artifacts generally, though. So I think the next section to start talking about would be just effects, because we haven't really talked about those at all. So I've got this effects layer window that I opened up before, and I very quickly added a zoom blur to it, but we can just go through a few of those right now. So the effects formats that we support are in VDMX are core image-based effects, Quartz Composer-based effects, which are great for making your own or downloading third-party ones, since there's a really big community of them. We support our new format called ISF, which is just GLSL-based shaders with this little blob at the top that describes what inputs you want. And after that, you've got free-frame effects are also supported. So if you are coming from Resolume or any other software that supports free-frame, you can just kind of drop all of those effects into the public free-frame directory and they'll work. So, and yeah, so if you want their radial blur, the free-frame radial blur, you can just use that as well. One of the ways you can, so the first thing you could do to add effects is just through this load asset menu. You can choose whatever effect you want, and there's kind of a whole bunch of them, standard sets of blurs, different ones, and you'll see that some of these end in .fs, and that means that they're new of the ISF versions of them, basically. And then other ones will end in .qtz, and those ones just means that they're Quartz Composer-based ones. Sometimes you'll have the same effect in there 2 or 3 times, just kind of in a different programming language, and sometimes they'll be optimized for different hardware, and you kind of have to find which ones work best for your system. So like there's Bulge, which does, we'll switch back to being a live camera. If you want to add live cameras or other feeds to your media bin, you can do that from this import media window. So, and then there are all of your sort of built-in sources here, so I can drag a live input there, and now I can actually trigger it. And so I've got my bulge effect going on, and this is the Quartz Composer-based one, and its list of parameters is, just bulge amount and position. And if you use the, the core image-based one under distortion effect, I think that one actually gives you the ability to specify input radius, which is a slightly different variable name. You can still specify the position, but it also gives you this input scale setting, which lets you do a pull-in instead. And then the Quartz Composer ones actually have another one, which is called Dent, which is kind of a similar play on that. Ooh, that one's kind of neat. I hope you guys are all doing this to your faces. Otherwise, I'm just being really embarrassed here. Yeah, so the Dent effect is kind of neat. If you want to do the funhouse mirror effect, or the lots of different funhouse mirrors. And then you've kind of got, you know, standard blurs, color adjustment ones that are in there can be really useful if you have, you know, just color controls. You want to be able to crank the saturation or lower the saturation on something if you want to go black and white. There's the ability to do like a hue shift if you just need to like knock things over by a little bit. For color correction, you know, contrast. If you drop the contrast into the negative values, you get an inversion, which can be kind of cool. Or, yeah, it can be kind of cool. And then, obviously, brightness, so you can fade things all the way to black or all the way to white using that. And then you've got, you know, kind of other standard ones. Just a straight up, if you just want hue adjust, there's one that's just a hue slider, so that can be useful. And then under color effect, you've got things like false color, which can be nice for doing like tints, and you could tint things into different colors and work with different color palettes that way. We could sit here and go through effects for a while. There are a few that are probably worth noting, though. So let's see. There are the halftone ones. I really like some of the halftone ones. We've been remaking some of these as fragment shaders, so I really like our RGB halftone effect as opposed to some of the other ones that I've seen. And this one's done as a fragment shader. Let's see, what else do we got? There's a whole bunch of miscellaneous Quartz Composer ones. Somebody mentioned that they really like the VO2 plugin, so these ones are made from Vade and Tom Butterworth, and we licensed them to include. So there's like some fast blurs that they've made, but I think probably the most famous one is called the Rut Etra, which does like the kind of standard point or scan line. It's got the scan line mode, so it looks like this, and you can increase the number of lines. I'll drag this window to be a little bit bigger, and then you could do like rotation, so it does like the fake kind of 3D look, where it's bright, things get further extruded, it's got the points mode, and then you could control how much it's extruding by, like this. If you want to make anything like this audio reactive, I guess this is probably the best time to show off something audio reactive, right? So, you know, I'll make this do a lot more points. And there we go, Z extrude. So going back over to the plugin section really quickly, I'm going to add the audio analysis. Let's hide this activity now that we totally don't need that anymore. Thanks. So I've got my audio analysis plugin here. And by default, you get these 3 bandpass filters. You can have as many of them as you want, and you can drag around their positions by clicking on them. You'll see that as you click and drag on them. In the sub-inspector, it actually shows you what the frequency, and if you drag up and down, it adjusts the width of it to make it grab a further range or more narrow range. And to activate the audio, you just click this little button in the top left, and now all of a sudden we start getting the frequency range readout for my voice, because that's what you hear right now. And there's a gain slider in here, so if you need to adjust the microphone level, you can do that. If you need to adjust to a different source, look in the sub-inspector, and there's your input device option. So if you want to work passing audio from Ableton Live or some other audio application like even iTunes, you can use Soundflower. If you're using an external audio piece of hardware like Blackmagic device or Motu, you can choose it from this menu as well. And of course, it just uses your system default settings by default. And then you can also choose if you want to look at just a specific channel of input, which can be useful if you're working with like particularly an audio interface that has multiple channels. You can mic a band with each different person, or a drum kit. You can mic the kick and the snare and do all of that separately. And then if you're working with headphones or you're using something like a Soundflower and you need to do an audio pass-through, there's that menu as well. So you can choose between either sending audio out to your built-in microphone or whatever other device is connected will show up there. So once you have audio analysis like actually running there, any slider or control in VDMX, you can just right-click on it as so, and you get all of these options for like MIDI detect and OSC and DMX control, even keyboard detect. And then if you want to assign it to a built-in controller, you go to this Use Data Source menu here. And then here's audio analysis and all of the available data sources published from it. So I can get the value of filter 1, filter 2, filter 3. And then there's this other one that gives you the peak frequency as ranged from 0 to 22.1 kilohertz. And then you could also get the peak frequency magnitude, which is just the magnitude of the most prevalent frequency at that time. So if you don't have filters set up everywhere around, the peak frequency magnitude always gives you like just kind of a good base level, no matter what, whether there's audio in the high or the low or the mids. Peak frequency value always gives you like just a good doon, 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 or whatever. Just do something when any audio is detected. But if you want to have them specific, you can just say, okay, use filter 1, and now you only get it when there's something in the low range. If I talk, yeah, I can't really do falsetto anymore, so we'll have to play some high notes some other time to avoid having this show off. So yeah, that's audio analysis in a nutshell. The other form of audio analysis that VDMX has is wave clock, which lets you do BPM detection, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. So that's just the Rudd-Escher effect, and I'll delete that and get rid of it. Some other effects that are in here, you know, kaleidoscope can be a lot of fun. And again, if I want to make something audio reactive, just right-click on it. And now, oh, that's probably not the one to have audio reactive, right? We don't want the input count to be audio reactive. So one thing that you can do that's kind of useful is I don't want to have to sync another slide or something. So I'm going to open up my UI inspector. And so the other big inspector in VDMX, I showed off before, I've got my workspace inspector, which has all of these different tabs like layers and plugins. The other big inspector that VDMX has is called the UI inspector. And whenever you click on any interface control in VDMX, you get controls for it, or all the sub-options for it. So I've clicked on a slider, and it's synced right now to the audio analysis, and that shows up here. If I click on another slider, it's not being synced to anything right now. My slider inspector shows a bunch of different settings here. I can adjust the value. The min and max envelope range shows up there, but it's not synced to anything, so it's not automated. If I want to manually assign it to something, instead of using the right-click menu, I can, in the UI inspector, click the plus button here, and I get the same sort of picking menu here for adjusting a setting there. And if I now go over to input count, I want to disable this for this particular slider, I'll click the minus button, and now input count is no longer receiving from the audio analysis, just the input angle. There are a bunch of other settings in here that we can go through. So I've got this audio analysis peak driving my setting. If I want to send this value out, actually over OSC or MIDI, you can go into the sending tab and say, okay, I want to send this value out over OSC, and pick a destination, and it'll actually send it. You put your OSC address down here, and you've got even some options for like how the value sends out. So you could send it as a normalized range. So this slider actually goes from -pi to pi. If I want to send those values out, I would turn off this toggle, and it would send actually -pi to pi. But usually when you're working with other OSC applications, you want to send a 0 to 1 range, so you would leave that on. But you can also invert the value before it gets sent out, and a whole bunch of other things. And there's also the option to send it out to MIDI, so if you want to have your input angle tied to some effect that you have in Ableton Live, some audio effect, you could send out the actual value here to Ableton Live, and in the MIDI sender sub-inspector, you choose whether you want to send as a note or a controller, anything along those lines. And you can also, of course, send this out over DMX, and you just pick what ArtNet universe you want to use and what channel you want it to start sending from, and then what value range you should send. Additionally, here I'll show this off on another slider. So I've got my input count slider again. Let's just turn this off. And from the right-click menu, you could also choose the disable all data sources, and that just cuts off all automation immediately. So we don't totally get a headache from watching that in our face. A useful thing on this input angle is sometimes you want to land maybe exactly at 0, which can be a little bit difficult. So in the UI inspector, there's this tab called Marks, and you can actually add little interesting points inside of your slider. So if I click the plus button, it adds one where the current value is. But I can double click here and specify that I want it to be exactly at 0. And now when I mouse around, it'll snap exactly there at that point. Another cool thing is, let's say I want to be able to reset to 0 very easily. I can hit the detect button here and hit Z or any other key, or use a MIDI shortcut or OSC, VDMX. Pretty much everything I say as far as data sources are concerned applies to MIDI, OSC, keyboard presses, and DMX. So you could assign keyboard shortcuts or anything to jump to a particular value on a slider. So I've sort of jammed around for a while by dragging around this slider, but eventually I want to just be able to reset back to its nominal state in some way. So you could assign a keyboard press that way. The next tab over is called presets. So this is a really powerful thing, because sometimes you want to switch between automation, automated audio analysis, a specific value that I like, and then another one where I'm controlling it by MIDI in real time, being able to scrub on it. So with the preset section, here I'll add a preset. You just click the plus button there, and then I get a new preset in this list. And when I click on it, I actually get to adjust what settings get restored when this preset is triggered. So if you want, it can restore the envelope, the actual value, what things it's sending on, whether or not it has interesting points or not, and what things it's receiving from. So in this case, I'm going to leave them all turned on. And now I'm going to go back over to this receiving section and reactivate this and make a new preset. And now, when I click these two buttons next to the slider, I can switch between whether or not it's automated by clicking the 2 button, or going back between manual control, which by pressing the 1 button. Another neat thing you can do with presets is you can actually name these. So I can call this first one, manual control, and I can call this one audio control. And now they actually show up as those buttons there. So I can click on audio, and it's audio reactive, manual, and it switches back to being manual control. And just like with marks on the slider, I can assign keyboard shortcuts or MIDI shortcuts to these as well. So I can hit detect and hit Q, and then go to audio and hit W. And now I've got actual keyboard shortcuts for switching back and forth between these two modes. And that can be really useful. We were talking about, somebody mentioned before, they really want to get away from using the computer. One of the big things that people, I think, run into is they want to be able to switch between kind of broad settings for their automations. Especially that's great if you want to be able to, you have a MIDI controller set up. What I'll do sometimes is have, a slider that you can adjust. Oh, here, let me turn off that. So sometimes I like to have it so that you have a slider that, you can use for manual control. And then if it has a couple of buttons next to it, you can actually use them for assigning which preset you want to use. So you can switch between, manual control, go to its nominal value, or let me have real-time control over it right from my controller. Any questions just before I move on to anything else? I'll switch over. No? We're good?
Yeah, there's one question here.
David, I was wondering if there was, I've been having trouble putting markers on clips. Is that similar to doing markers to sliders? Like cue points on clips? I've found that they've been resetting and sort of jumping around everywhere.
Oh, that's, you should send me an email about that. That sounds a little bit weird. So one thing that you can do, interesting points on movies work a little bit differently, but kind of the same general idea. But you can go into the file inspector section. So here, try and follow along with me. I'll just go over here real quick. So in the file inspector, you can preview clips before they play. And you can specify any particular settings you want for when that clip plays. So, for example, if I want the rate of a movie to play at, specifically when I trigger this clip, play at 1.9x, I click this clip is playing at 1.9x, and I switch to another one, it goes back to 1. So one of the things that's in here are chapter markers, and you can actually go through and say, okay, I want a chapter marker here, and it uses the movie time up there. I'll tab this closed. So, and then add another chapter marker in here, and then when I hit apply, and then when I trigger that, I get those 2 chapter markers in there at these particular points. And then if you have another clip with chapter markers assigned, it'll actually replace those with whatever the chapter markers are for that clip. So the idea is that if you have QuickTime used to support this concept of chapter markers that you can embed in movies. So VDMX tries to read those out if they're actually in there and auto-populate this list. But we were trying to make it so, hey, you can add the chapter markers in the same way here, and they'll work by adding interesting points in there. But if you're running into any weird behavior, you should just send me an email. If you're this goes for anybody out there. If you ever like say, oh my God, this is weird and not actually functioning properly, please go to like the help menu, and there's this report bug option, and you can like send us a bug, describe what happened, everything broke. No, you should give me a more detailed description than that. But you can include a project file and your email address, and we actually like do write back to those the vast majority of the time. And yeah, sometimes we don't run into problems because there's so much going on or so many possibilities that if something happens, we might not know about it. So please let us know about bugs as you encounter them so we can fix them, instead of you just cursing at us blindly in the middle of the night. Yeah, so but the answer to your question is chapter markers are usually the place you would go to set interesting marks for movies themselves. But if there's another way that should be working, or if it's acting funny, definitely email me.
Are they specific for each clip? You can set them for each clip and they'll stay like that for each clip?
Yeah, that's the idea. Yeah. So yeah, because you usually want them to jump to a particular movie time.
Yeah.
So the tricky thing is the movie time slider is kind of one of the most unique sliders in the app, because no other slider actually, the range doesn't change. Most sliders, if it goes 0 to 1, it's always 0 to 1. So you can, and even if it's, so when you put interesting points on it, they know to be at a specific value. If the range changed, you wouldn't really necessarily know whether or not, okay, scale it over whatever the new range is supposed to be, or keep them at their exact values. Keep it, if the range changed from 0 to 1 and this interesting point was at a half, should it go to, and your new slider range is 0 to 2, should it go to, that interesting point go to 1, or should it stay at the actual value of a half? So that's kind of the debate there on the time slider. When the range actually changes, do they stay at their actual value, or do they scale along with the slider itself? But if you want, so here's a trick that I'll show off real quick. Sometimes you do want to be able to just jump to like specific points within, or like percentage-wise through the movie necessarily. So let's say you always want to jump 10% in, 20% in, something along those lines. One of the most useful plugins in VDMX for sort of creating your own data sources is this one called the Control Surface plugin. And this lets you basically build your own little MIDI controller layout, your own control surface. And it's got, so you start off by going into the workspace inspector and, click on that. And in this menu over here, you get to add UI items to this. So if you want a button toggle that you just add a button, you could rename it. So this could be called, my toggle switch. And if you want this toggle switch to control something else, one of the things you can do, it shows up as a data source. So you can right click and say, I want control surface 1, my toggle switch. The control surface also lets you do this thing where you can just control drag onto a thing. So if I want this to control my play pause button, now this toggle switch controls that play pause button. And this can be really useful if like you want to have a really simplified set of controls. You just have, I just need play pause control. So I can like hide that window completely and just have this one button there. I'll just actually bring that back up so we can use another example. So the next thing I'll show is the next UI item. There's a multi-button, which is useful if you're using like a TouchOS layout. It has its own multi-button UI item, so you can use that. But the one I'll show off is called slider, and it literally just gives you a slider. And I can make it so that this slider controls my movie time. So dragging here scrubs through the movie just like it would. And this slider that I've created won't have any weirdness with like its range changing ever. So I'll switch over to my UI inspector so I can adjust the options for the slider. And once you're in the UI inspector for a control surface slider, it has a few extra options. So you can choose whether or not, you can adjust the slider range as it appears here. So by default, the value that appears on the slider goes 0 to 1. I want the range to appear 0 to 5. You can do it that way. But internally, if the publish normalized option is turned on, the value still goes 0 to 1 everywhere. And that way VDMX knows, scale this over my entire slider. So a good example of this is if I'm using this to drive my volume slider goes 0 to 1. And even though my custom control surface slider goes 0 to 5, it's going over the exact same range there. But if I turn off this publish normalized option, now the only usable range of my custom slider is actually when it goes 0 to 1. After that, my volume slider just clips at 1 because it's receiving a value bigger than 1, and it's saying, okay, set it to 1.5, set it to 2. But if I switch back to publish normalized, now it's just going over that particular range. So it's a difference between, usually when you're sending like OSC values or MIDI values, you want it to properly scale to whatever the proper range of the slider is. And that's really what this comes down to. But there are situations where you do want to say, go to this very specific value. And that's where you want to turn off the publish normalized stuff. So you kind of don't need it except when you get into these really weird situations. So the next thing, just to answer this question, I'll switch it back to a slider range of 0 to 1. And I'm going to go into the mark section, and I'm going to add in, I'm just going to hit the plus button a bunch of times. The inspector here has this option for auto space marks, so that way it just kind of creates a whole, it's automatically spaces them. I guess it's kind of self-explanatory, right? So now that I've got that going, I've got these marks set up, and I can just assign keyboard shortcuts for all of these now. So when you're working with marks, when you're setting up things, you can do this continuous detect mode if you want to just like step through the list and have it just stay in learn mode. So I'll just hit continuous learn, click on the very first mark, and then hit detect, and then I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I guess I made 8 of them, so that's perfect. So now I can use these to actually jump around within my movie. I'm hitting the number of keys on my keyboard. It's controlling this slider in my control surface. Slider in the control surface is controlling the movie time slider. Sort of a kind of an odd way of setting it up, but you can do quite a bit with these kinds of, with making the control surface plugin. And yeah, you can jump to specific points in the movie this way. Another way that this can be used is if you've actually got 2 layers going, and you want to be able to jump so that their movies are at the same point. So I can trigger another movie and show off its movie time. So I've got these 2 movies, and if you want to be able to actually scrub both of them or reset both of them to the same point, you could use this one, I can use this one control surface slider to control multiple things. So I'll drag this over, and now I can sort of jam on both of these clips at the same time by jumping them around. Or I can make a whole second slider and have a separate range of keyboard shortcuts so I can trigger them separately. But you'll notice that it's moving them percentage-wise through the movie, even though they're the same duration, they're different durations. Let's see, yeah, these are different durations, just barely. Anyway, but it drags them proportionally through. I don't know if that answered your question. I kind of went off on a bit of a tangent there. Sorry.
Yeah, that was very detailed and good. Yeah, so thank you.
Very detailed and good. Awesome. Yeah, I aim to please. Where were we a minute ago? We were talking about effects, marks, stuff like that. Cool. So yeah, we were talking about effects. I'll go back to
it. By the way, David, we're at the halfway mark. We've just passed an hour, so just keep that in mind, I guess.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so there's really just one other really important effect that I wanted to show off, which is called the layer mask effect. So one of the kind of crucial things that you do with video processing is, especially these days, is you create a mask. You want to block out part of an image. So I've got layer 1. I'm going to just quickly switch it back so that it's playing my live video feed. And right now there's just that one layer. And what I want to do is block it out so that just my face is visible, more or less. So I'm going to make another layer, and I'm going to call it mask. But what I'm going to do is I don't want this layer to actually be visible in my output. So I'm going to go into its composition controls and just hit hide so it never shows up. And I'll go over to our preview window so we can see it. So for the purposes of this, hide the effect. Oh, I don't actually need that, but I'll open up the mask source controls. And what I'm going to want to use for this example is under Quartz Composer sources, there's this radial gradient, which gives me just this white dot. And I can adjust its size, and I can move it around. So I'm going to want to make it a little bit smaller, maybe. And now, under layer 1, which is showing my live input, I'm going to go in here and choose under color effect, you've got layer mask. And I'm going to choose for its masking stream the mask layer that I made. And now, wherever the mask stream, I'm going to adjust it so that the mask layer is the same aspect ratio. And now, wherever the mask is white, you can see through to my face. So if I want to adjust this a little bit more, I can reduce the radius or increase it and adjust it like this. And now I can actually put something behind my face. So I'm going to add another layer, make the composition mode for this over mode so it appears in front of instead of adding on. And I can pick whatever I want for this other background. Let's just, for now, I'll make a checkerboard. Oh, why didn't I appear in front of the checkerboard? Oh, that's so sad. Oh, there we go. Boom. Now I'm appearing in front of the checkerboard. So in the areas where it's kind of partially, where it's gray, you can see it's actually showing through partially. And then as I make it totally white, it blocks out everything behind it. So masks are pretty useful if you want video to just hit part of your output. And this is a big part of making projection mapping setups, is you can just, a lot of times people work in Photoshop, and they'll just sort of make the cutout of an actual object that they're projecting onto, and then they'll use the mask as on their main output so that their projection only hits part of the screen. So, what should we talk about next? Let's go and talk about, we go to talk about MIDI echo mode. That's probably a good one, right? So I'm going to quickly just do a new project and we'll start from scratch once again. So MIDI echo mode lets you do, if you have like, oh, I'll just, sorry, switch you back to seeing me. Hi. So you can see me once again. Hi. So I've got this little core controller here, like this. And I'm going to go into my media bin and just quickly load in some files again. So I'll load in these. So what MIDI echo mode lets you do is send things back out to buttons that can light up. So these buttons on my controller can actually light up red on this particular controller. Some other controllers can light up green. Other ones can light up in a whole slew of different colors. So the first thing I'm going to do to set up just media bin triggers here is I'm going to inspect my media bin and hit detect mode. And I can actually press these buttons here and it'll start adding these little icons here in my media bin. If I want to send back out to this controller, oops, which ones did I use? These ones, awesome. Oh, sorry, I need to add another layer in there. Totally forgot about this. I thought you guys, yeah, anyway. There we go. Hey, look, it's me again. Preview windows are wonderful. So I've got my cord controller, and there we go. Everything's backwards for me. So, and I've got these triggers set up, and I'm going to go into the setup panel, and I can actually choose to send back out. I think for the nano control, actually. So there's always little details of controllers. I've got this cord nano controller, but normally I want to be able to light the buttons up on it. I have to actually use the Korg Nano Control Editor program, I think, in order to switch it into write to it. Yeah. So, like I was kind of saying, some controllers you have to do this extra little setup in order to make what I'm about to show you work. So for the Korg Nano controls, you have to open up their editor program, go into this control panel under Common, and choose LED mode external. And then I think I need to write the scene data to my thing. And this actually controller, like, you know, it's got some useful things. If you're working with multiple controllers, you can adjust the MIDI channel and things like that. So now that I've got the external mode set up, I don't need to save the changes, I don't think. Now, you can actually see when I'm pressing these buttons, they're not lighting up automatically. Oh, but they should be matching my media bin. Oh no, why not match my media bin? They should be showing what's playing. That's terrible. Oh no, it's not working right. Why aren't you working right? Did it not save them? How embarrassing. Korg Nano Controller Editor. Let's do it one more time. External mode. I'll unplug this guy and plug him back in. See what happens. Should be lighting up these buttons. Who's got another controller there? No? Sean, hey, Sean, you got a controller there?
Yeah, I haven't got one plugged in yet, but I've got a Novation Nocturne.
Can you show off echo mode there? Why isn't mine working? I'm so embarrassed.
We've got another Korg Nano here apparently as well.
Yeah?
They're
Can you guys get
they're
your
quite
buttons lighting
popular
up?
down in Australia.
Oh man, this was totally working before, and then I switched it out of intro mode to show off that in particular. Let me get it working with another. Yeah, hold on. So, I was gonna. How about I'll just answer a really quick question from the audience before to show this off. I'm a little embarrassed now. Here, we'll put something on layer 2, and we'll see if this works. So, I've got 2 layers. I'm gonna go to layer 1. One of the questions before, somebody mentioned before that they have to get away from their controller to change their composition modes, and that's actually not true, because one of the things you can do from the UI inspector is sync things to any pop-up button works the same way as any other UI button or UI controller. You can assign shortcuts to them just like you can with anything else. So I'm going to go into here. And so let's say I have a couple of different blend modes that I want to assign my controller to. So you can just go into the UI inspector. I clicked on my composition mode menu, and now it's showing up in my UI inspector. I hit detect, and then I could press one of these buttons. This controller's not working. No, there it goes. Okay, it worked that time. Great. So I can assign this button goes to additive mode. I can then have another button that goes to, let's say, what mode do we want? Difference blend mode. Press a button, and now I'll switch to that blend mode. So additive, difference, additive, difference. So you can do all of that. You can assign keyboard shortcuts to pretty much anything, MIDI, keyboard, whatever. So yeah, this is how you do it in. Yeah, I have no idea where that's coming from. Is that a feed coming from you guys?
Yep, sorry about that.
That music?
Sorry about that. That was me. I was pressing a clip trying to figure out the MIDI thing, and it played a clip with sound. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. I thought it was that I had Ableton Live open and I was sending MIDI to that accidentally, and that would have been just kind of funny. So actually, I'm going to see if this works now. Oh, actually, so it did work here, actually. So now I've got these 2 buttons in my, you can see it in my preview window. It did actually work in here. I don't know why it didn't. So I've got these shortcuts set up for switching between composition modes here. And once I've assigned keyboard shortcuts, or once I've assigned the MIDI shortcuts to them, I turn on this option for enable echo on receivers. And then now actually it lights up the buttons along with what blend mode I have selected. So this is called echo mode. And if I actually change the menu item, if I choose manually difference, it'll actually automatically update the thing that's lit up on my controller. I switch back to additive mode, and the proper button on my controller lights up to indicate that. I'm going to have to figure out why that didn't work with my media bin. I'm a little unhappy about that. But if you're working with a controller that has multiple light up buttons, if you go into the options section here, you can actually specify what MIDI value gets sent when it should echo back out. So sometimes if you have multi-colors, you can set the note on velocity to match a particular color that you want to have. And likewise for the note off velocity, if you want to have it maybe red or white or whatever, probably should get a different controller than this one, but it's so convenient. I know these Korg Nano controllers are very convenient. That's kind of echo mode, and you can also do it with the media bin. I don't know why that didn't quite work. So let's move on to, I've got a whole list of things here. Let's talk about beat matching, because that's kind of the next thing, wave clock. I talked very briefly about, there's the audio analysis plugin, which lets you just get the audio levels of stuff that's coming out. The next option, as far as audio analysis is concerned, is actually getting the BPM of an audio stream. So I was warned to not play things that YouTube might pick up for copyright infringement, so I just very quickly made a terrible, terrible Ableton Live track that's just like a couple of MIDI things playing.
Does it have infamous MIDI dogs on it?
No, it does not have MIDI dogs on there. I wonder if you can actually do MIDI dog track from Ableton Live. Somebody who knows a little bit more about Live might know that. But actually, let me give you guys like the VJ's 5 minutes of what you could know about Ableton Live. So I'm going to switch over to Live, and it can be a really useful program just to have alongside of VDMX, or for messing around. And it's basically got a different column for every track, and you can have audio tracks or MIDI tracks, and I just made 3 MIDI tracks really quickly. And if you click on one of them, you'll see that I have these audio synths on them, and then where these notes are at the bottom, it just plays those notes. So if I hit play now, I'm sorry, I have it going out my Soundflower, so here we go. Oops, I need to click on things properly. So yeah, I've got, I just hit record. Yeah, that's terrible. Okay, so if I click on this, you'll see you can hear right now. There's just these 2 clicks, and now I've added in more notes. So it has this little note editor at the bottom for the thing that's playing right now. And then I kind of added in a few different sounds and hit play on them. Pretty terrible. But I've got this playing, and so in Live, I've got this set right now in the top left corner over here. You can do a tap tempo, or you manually type in a BPM. So if I want to slow this down, we can bring it down to really kind of terrible at 60 BPM. Kind of terrible at every BPM, but I've got it set to 110. And I'm going to go over to the clock plugin over here in VDMX. So the clock plugin lets you it gives you a basic couple of data sources in here. You go under clock. One of them is just called measure position, and it goes from 0 to 1 based off of whatever your clock position is. So you can see that there's this clock dial going around, and it's driving that layer opacity slider. And with this, you can manually type in. I could say, oh, I want it to be 120 BPM, and that would be fine if you know what it actually is going to be. But if you don't know what the BPM is going to be, you can hit this wave clock button, and it'll try and lock on. Now, it's getting a little bit fuzzy right now because it's going through my built-in microphone, and there's a little bit of lag. Oh, and I've actually got it set to Soundflower. So I'm going to choose Soundflower from this and go over to Live and tell it to send out by Soundflower, so that I'm getting a totally direct signal. And there it goes. It's off by 0.04. So we can hear it again, I'm going to make an audio analysis plugin real quick and set its input device to Soundflower. And this is a useful thing. So if I want to hear it, I can use the pass-through from the audio analysis plugin. So now, let's see. I've got layer 1 composition being driven by that. Let's just hide the camera from the output for a second. So that's doing a pretty good job of beat syncing it, right? It's whenever it loops, my video cuts out and it starts over again. If you've got something that's going more complex, you want it to loop over multiple measures. The clock plugin has a bars section, so if you want something that goes over 4 bars instead, it's going to maybe we can make an Ableton Live track that's a little bit more interesting then, that goes on for a little while longer. We don't need to get into too far into live. There we go. Another cool thing about Ableton Live, though, is so I've got these synths playing, but you can actually just send straight MIDI out of it, which can be also useful if you just want to send, give you this option of where you want to send MIDI out to. So for these tracks that I have that are MIDI, you'll see it says audio to, and then master or whatever. But in this case, for this track, it actually says MIDI to, and then under here, I have this option that says to VDMX, and I'll choose that. And now if I double click here, I can actually press, just throw in some MIDI notes that'll play out, and you can choose whether or not it loops or not. If you don't see this MIDI 2 section, sometimes it's hidden by default. There's this I/O button on the side. I always miss it. It's like off by default, and you'll be like, pulling out your hair, where is the ability to send MIDI to? Toggle that, boom. You may also have to go into the Ableton Live preferences, and under MIDI, you actually have to go in and enable output to VDMX that way. And actually, if you're working with Ableton Live, one of the things you can actually do is just use straight up MIDI clock. So if I turn off Soundflower, one of the options is to use MIDI clock, and you could choose, to VDMX. And then in this case, it'll actually use the clock from Live. So in this case, yeah, you can see that the, well, maybe you can't because it's streaming, but the measure position dial is actually moving a little bit more staggered right now because it's getting MIDI clock, which only sends little advanced notes every 96 or 96 times per measure. But the thing I wanted to show off here was I'm gonna hit stop on all of these. I'll get rid of this track there. So along with that, with these, I'll hit stop on these. If I hit play on just this one MIDI track and I go over to VDMX, we don't hear anything anymore. But one of the plugins that's really useful is called Com Display, and it lets you just kind of look at whatever MIDI or OSC data is coming into your computer. So if I switch to Com Display over to look at MIDI, we'll start actually seeing these. We'll see these MIDI notes as they play in live, getting sent over to VDMX. So there we go. Note. All of those notes get sent out, and I can actually have these things like trigger video clips in VDMX. So if I go to the media bin and inspect it, I'll hit the detect button, and now every time one of those, why is that not even is all funked? What did I do here? Should totally be picking those up. Oh, there it goes. Wonderful. I was just not waiting long enough. So now those MIDI notes, as they get sent from live, should be triggering these clips in VDMX. Are they not? Oh, we just can't see it because this time slider is updating, maybe. Disable all data sources. No, those notes are being received. Oh, yeah, okay. There we go. We can see them changing. It's not changing very rapidly. And I don't think I have all of those notes actually set up. Let's see. Anyway, so yeah, MIDI notes from live, triggering clips in VDMX. The next thing to show off there would be, you can also send, in addition to notes, you click this little E button, and it gives you an envelope editor. And so now it'll send, in addition to note values, if I switch over to VDMX, you'll see there's also this pitch wheel being sent off at intervals, so you can control anything here. So if I do MIDI detect now, it picks up the pitch bend coming from live, and it animates the layer opacity from there. So as it follows this curve in VDMX in my actual output. So I would be curious a little bit. Some people in the audience mentioned that they use Ableton Live sometimes with other people. Are there any specific questions about getting VDMX and Ableton Live working together that anyone has, or any general comments about the way that you use them together? I'm always curious to hear how people use them together.
Hi, David. It's Jono again. I work with a producer called Spoonbill, and our set's kind of like a live audio-visual set, and he's sending... we have like a bed of clips for every one of his tracks. Like I've created a synchronized bed, and so there are like points in this bed of tracks, and in this bed of clips that we have that synchronize perfectly to, like, you know, a certain sound in the audio, and then there are parts which have nothing. They just have a green screen, and I key that out with my mixer, and that's keyed out. So that's like anytime there's a triggered clip, I can mix a live element into it when it's the blank section. But what we find is that we have to really sort of finesse the start point of our clip when we're setting it up in VDMX so that it's synchronized perfectly with Ableton. So it's kind of like this. We're always trimming and cutting our clip, so that our video clip, so that it syncs with the in point of the audio. And even if his tempo changes, the tempo won't change in VDMX and will go out of sync, if you know what I mean. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does. So let me show you a quick little trick here then. So inside of the layer source controls is this option here. I kind of didn't show it off before because it has to do with the clock. But you pick one of these, if you have multiple clock plugins, but usually you just have one, and you can click this little stopwatch button here, and this button here will synchronize it. And now it's actually following the BPM of my clock and trying to match it up as much as possible. Here, let me disable this data source here. So if it's trying to make this particular loop go over 8 measures exactly right now. So if you know the number of measures that his thing is supposed to play, and you're actually receiving MIDI timecode in any kind of, or sorry, MIDI clock, you can enable this option, and it'll adjust the rate based off of his tempo coming from live. So right now, if I have my MIDI clock coming in at 120 BPM, or I'm sorry, 110 BPM, if I then increase that from to 220 BPM, you can see now my loop in VDMX actually starts playing twice as fast. It's adjusting relative to his BPM change, to the BPM change as the clock does over here.
How accurate is that? Like how much, is there much latency?
No, it's actually pretty good. And if you notice that it's actually starting to slip, there's this actual button there that you can just press, and it resyncs it for you to the right point. So the only trick to using MIDI clock is that when MIDI clock starts, it actually sends a start message, which says this is the very beginning of everything. So maybe you noticed I hit stop in live. My current measure position in VDMX is 641. When I hit the start button in live, both of them reset to the very beginning. And then if I needed to, I could click the auto sync thing there to get it right back in the right place. So that could be maybe a useful thing that you could try out. I don't know. Have you ever messed with that?
No, I haven't. I didn't even know that function was there.
So there you go. Yeah. So, yeah. And it can also be useful. Sometimes you want. So right below that, I've got the amount for jumping around, and that's where jump by beats comes in handy, because you might want to jump forward exactly by 1 beat, or jump back by a beat, and that could be a nice kind of effect you could do, where it's just jump back by a beat and then immediately jump forward by a beat, and you can get especially if you assign keyboard shortcuts to them. So if you're going through and doing a lot of MIDI or keyboard setup all at once, there's this option in the workspace menu called Hardware Learn Mode, Command L, and it just makes everything that's MIDI syncable or OSC syncable light up blue. So you can see the composition mode menu is lit up blue, the ability to specify what layer you're triggering to, all of everything is lit up blue that you could sync. So I can use these 2 buttons here. I'll make them A and S, and now I can actually kind of, what's going on there? Oops, there we go. Did I not sign? Oh, sorry. They both totally picked up MIDI pitch wheel there, because that MIDI pitch wheel is sending constantly. Let me turn that off. There we go. Boom. Yeah. So I'll do that one more time. Hardware learn, A and S. So that's one thing about when you're working with MIDI. Sometimes things are sending constantly, and you have to disable them at the source, otherwise you go a little bit nuts. So anyway, I really enjoy, as a matter of like being able to jump around or mess around with clips, I love using the next and the jump forward and back buttons for chopping up video, and it's a really effective way like of cutting along with the music. And you can just go back by a beat, forward by a beat. Sometimes that can be really effective, and even keeping things in sync though. So you go, for every time you go back, you go forward the same amount. You can get some pretty cool results with that. And these buttons you can actually, of course, since any button in VDMX, in addition to receiving, you know, it's a keyboard or a MIDI shortcut, you can actually have anything to be audio reactive. So I can actually, so we'll switch this to built-in microphone. Sorry, feedback loop. Yeah, that was bound to happen eventually. Awesome. So now I've got just my regular audio analysis going, and I want to make it so that like that dicing up that I was doing with my keyboard, I can do that with just audio, straight up audio analysis. I'll go to my back button and switch it from key A to audio analysis, peak frequency magnitude. And now, whenever there's a little bit of audio, it'll jump back by a tiny bit. You'll notice that when I have a data source selected, that the submenu for this is a little bit different than the one for sliders. So here I've got this threshold slider. So if I need to adjust where or how much volume I need before it actually does one of these backwards triggers, I could raise that threshold. So now if I whisper, it doesn't actually trigger it while I'm whispering it. But then when I talk loudly, it pulls things back by a little bit. Another thing that's cool here is that you can have it ignore repeat values. So that's on by default, so it'll cause it to jump back once, but I have to wait for it to go down to silence again before it'll trigger it again. If I turn that off, as long as I'm talking really loud, it's going to keep going backwards. As long as I'm above the threshold, it's going to keep going backwards. So that's kind of a useful thing with ignore repeats. And that can be a useful thing, like whether or not you want to have, like, while I'm holding this down, keep doing this behavior, or do this once, and then I want to be able to have very accurate control over it. Do it once, reset, do it again. And below that, you'll see that there's also this option for toggle on input or valve from input. And that doesn't make so much difference for like the back button because it's a momentary button. It's just either do this now or not. But let's say I wanted to apply the same idea to the pause button in here. So I can pause the video, I can start the video. There are two kind of behaviors I can have for that. I can make it so that when there's a sound, toggle the behavior, start and stop when I talk. Or I can say, while I'm talking, keep it going. So I'll do this again. I'll just say, okay, audio analysis, peak frequency magnitude. And right now in here, so I'll raise the threshold again. By default, it's set to toggle on input. So when I go like this, starts playing. If I turn it to this option that's called valve from input, it'll actually switch it so that it's either on or off, directly tied to whether or not I'm talking or not. So it's not toggling, it's following the exact state of the audio analysis. If it is currently above the threshold, play. If it's below the threshold, don't play. Although I guess it's backwards for this, right? If I'm not talking, it's playing, and when I'm not talking, it's playing. When I talk, it stops, pausing. If I want the opposite behavior, all I've got to do is there's this invert button here, click that, and now pause while I'm not talking, plays while I'm talking. So the UI inspector really has like all of these great options for customizing how any UI item, whether it's a slider or a button or a pop-up menu or really anything, you could really customize how it reacts to receiving from MIDI or another data source. It can be very useful. And likewise, buttons have the option for echo mode in the same way. Any value you could have a button, you know, if I want my play pause button sent out to something else, I can go into the sending tab. Buttons themselves can also have presets in the same way that sliders can. I showed that off earlier. So if you want to switch between an automated mode like this, and I want to also have my manual mode, I can actually still have both of those in there. So I can switch between that for like even whether or not a movie is playing or not. Once we find a little sort of UI idea, we really love to spread it around as much as possible. So, any questions before I move on to another topic? I kind of showed off just their wave clock and MIDI clock coming off of Ableton Live. If you're gonna, I didn't want to spend too much time on it, but if you want to learn more about wave clock or just see it in action, there's one of these templates. It's called Wave Clock Demo. And what's really cool about this one is that it just uses video generators and these step sequencer plugins and some LFOs to have things that get automated on beat. So here, I'll just play in live again. I gotta switch this over to Soundflower. Yeah, so now it's, and then I'll add a pass-through just so we can hear it again. Play through. So the way that this is set up, and this is a great way of using wave clock, is once things are going, I've got my step sequencer plugin here, and step sequencers are can be multi-track. So I've got all of these different values that are looping over 8 measures, and it's all being driven by wave clock. So on beat, it just steps through the next set of values and smoothly interpolates between them. So in the step sequencer plugin, you've got this in the workspace inspector, all of your different tracks, and each one of those is just another data set value that you can switch between. And you could specify, how many rows there are. One of the data types is called color. So you can actually, if I'm looking at a color track over here, you can pick what colors actually get hit at each step along the way. So you can just, make your own color palettes here. If you want to have things that are a little bit more muted, or less saturated, whatever. So you can define your own colors there. And then there's this extra column called interpolation, and you could specify, whether or not things fade really smoothly, or whether or not they do like a hard cut between your colors and stuff like that. And then the other plugin that I just have driving values right now is called the LFO plugin. And you just kind of add sine waves, or you've got sine waves, Bezier curves that you can define as your own, cosine, square wave, triangle. If you want a random number generator, you can go into the LFO for that as well. And then a newer option is you can actually just type in an equation for one of those, and I'll let people play with that on their own because that can be a little bit fun. So yeah, wave clock is kind of a lot of fun when especially with these real-time video generators where you have like things being changed, quantized on beat. It could be a great way of having something that renders even in front of a layer. So if you've got like backing tracks going, you can have, just at key points, things that pop up and play over them as these interactive generators. And I've also got these driving a whole bunch of effects down here as well. You can see the bump distortions turning on and off on beat, and the zoom effect is being driven, so it's zooming in and out at the right times. Yeah. So yeah, once again, any questions or specific things you guys want me to talk about with in terms of like wave clock or step sequencers or LFOs? There's kind of a whole bunch you can do in those worlds. No,
I've got one, David. Just what's the best practice for being able to quickly jump between different times in wave clock? Say you want to have something on a beat, or you want to double time it. I've had different troubles with getting that going on quickly before.
Oh, that's okay. So we've actually talked about having, and I think this is actually something we're going to add to wave clock mode, because a number of people have mentioned that is sometimes they just want to have things go double time. So wave clock does have this option of letting you like speed up its detection algorithm or slow down its detection algorithm somewhat, and it's just kind of a cue to it. But I think we're actually going to just add in, like you were saying, sometimes you want to be able to just double the tempo. But one way that you can actually do that is by using the rate slider in the LFO itself. So if you want something that to go double speed, you can assign interesting points to the places you want, and then when you want double speed to happen on, oops, I didn't want it on the Z key, I wanted it on this one. There we go, Q. No, I'm starting at the top again. I want single detect. Detect Z. So yeah, that way you can have, keyboard shortcuts set up to jump to different interesting points on your rate sliders for individual step sequencers or LFO plugins. And then you can maybe make it so that it bangs the reset time button so it syncs things back up at the right point once you have them out. Because the rate slider here adjusts things relative to the clock that you have it set to. So if you want to speed everything up or slow it down, you can do it that way. One of the things about double time, and this is kind of a conceptual thing, is when you speed things up, you're inherently kind of pulling it out of sync unless you're slowing it back down exactly at a quantized amount. So conceptually, double timing off of wave clock is a little bit of a mind screw, which is why we haven't added that yet. But I think we have to find some sort of a workaround where it functions that way, because it is kind of useful to be able to just, with a single key, drop down like that.
Cool, thanks.
Was that sort of an answer?
Yeah, I think it'd be useful having a global quick option for doing that.
Yeah, well, and so yeah, the workaround right now is even you can have like a control surface that has a global rate slider that you use to adjust various LFOs. And if you've probably been looking at these LFO and step sequencer transport control settings, they actually look a lot like the ones for movie controls. You've got this ability to switch between quantized mode, which is fixed to the clock, but if you turn that off, it switches into being in seconds mode. So if you want to have something that runs over an LFO that runs over 90 seconds, you can actually do that. You can just specify, I want 90 seconds. I don't want it to be in terms of a clock. And then you could, of course, switch back to saying, okay, I want it to be over 4 measures because I want it to loop fairly quickly, things like that. And then, you can make as many LFO and step sequencer plugins as you want. And then each one of them can have as many waves and tracks as you need. So LFO plugin kind of looks like this when you first create it. Well, it looks a lot like that other one. And then, if you need to, you can go in here and delete any waves you're not using. So if you don't want the sine, cosine, and whatever, you can just have your ramp, your waveform, your custom waveform. If you option click on a custom waveform, it gives you extra control points. So if you just want to draw out something, you can do it that way. If you command click, it gives you a little control point for pulling on it. So if you want to make something a little bit curved there. And like with movies, you've got the option, you can make an LFO that's reversing loop so that you don't have to worry about making it so that it syncs up properly at the very beginning and the very end. And of course, it's got the same scratch control that I was talking about in the movie. You can actually just scratch on an LFO. Sometimes that can be cool when you're using real-time generators. And the hold on end option is also kind of useful if you just want to have like a one-shot LFO that plays an animation once, and then you can assign an interesting point to the 0 point to make it restart. So if you want to be able to say 0, detect, and then so whenever I hit the 1 key, go and I'll assign something to that. Let's add another layer called live input. I'll make it so that this LFO drives the size of this. So, one thing I didn't mention before is every slider has range handles. So the command key sets your maximum envelope. Your option key sets your lower range on there if you don't want to use the UI inspector. So let's limit the range here so that our width and height only goes up to 1. And I'll use this new LFO that I've created with this waveform. And another thing that you can use that a lot of people don't know about these days is you can actually copy and paste settings from one slider or UI item to another. So I can click on this width slider that I just made that responds to this waveform, and I can hit this copy button there, and then click on my height slider and paste, and it'll have the exact same settings. And that's persistent across, if you open a new project. So if you have like a particular slider settings or something, you can copy them. That actually also works with presets and plugins. You can, if you have like a media bin that you like, or a step sequencer plugin that has very particular settings, you can actually copy it from one setup to another by, for plugins, the copy option is right here. So if I have like, a step sequencer plugin step sequencer 1, I can copy it to the clipboard and paste it over another one, or I can duplicate that plugin, and then I've got step sequencer 3 that has all of those same tracks as step sequencer 1. So that's actually really useful, and a lot of people don't. We were asked to add copy and paste support for a long time, and then we did, and a lot of people just don't know that it's there now. So it's even also there for like layers. If you have a layer in here, there's a copy and a duplicate selected layer option right there. Here's the paste. So really, really useful thing. What was I showing off? LFO. And I've got this LFO, and it's set to use the 1 key so I could reset it. And, oh, there we go. Cool. So I'll hide my foreground real quick, background, so you can see this. So I've got this waveform, and it's set to respond to the 1 key. And when I hit 1, it does that. But it's a one-shot, so I can just, whenever I want, run that animation. If I want, I can add, another sine wave in there, and then maybe that'll just run like an effect that happens on there at the same time, in the same amount of time. Here we'll add in bulge. LFO, sine wave, and now when I hit 1, it'll adjust both that level and the amount of bulge at the same time, and then end up at a specific value. So that can be useful if you want to have like transition elements or things that happen, but I don't know. You can probably think of a lot of ways of doing that. Just one-shot animations are generally kind of useful, especially if you could restart them on beat, and they're kind of cool if they're really fast even. Yeah, cool. So what else should we talk about today? Let's do another new project. Okay, so kind of an infinite amount of stuff to talk about. What else do we got in here? We didn't talk about Siphon yet, right? Siphon is kind of a big thing these days. So VDMX can, well, I'll start at the very beginning with Siphon. So Siphon is a new thing that was added, I think, in 10.5 or 10.6. And it's this open source project that lets you pass video streams between applications. So the two most basic Siphon applications are called Simple Server, and it just generates this video feed. And if you want to receive that in VDMX, all you've got to do is add a layer. And under the source menu, there's this whole section called Siphon, and Simple Server shows up there. And there we go. We have it over our output. Siphon, like movie files and real-time generator, supports alpha channels. So this example actually is sending alpha channels. So if I switch this to OpenGL over mode, you'll see that it's semi-transparent. You can still see behind it a little bit to me, but not completely. Some parts are completely opaque. So let's say we're doing this composition in VDMX, and we want to send this out to somewhere else Siphon. So another Siphon test application is called Simple Client. And this basically just says, okay, let me preview anything that's publishing the Siphon. So right now, the only thing that's publishing the Siphon is the Simple Server that we have running. If you want to send Siphon output from VDMX, one of the plugins is just called Siphon Output, and it appears and it looks like this. And then you just pick which layers or feeds you want to publish from VDMX, and they'll be available. So if I want this mix to be available, I'll publish the main output. And now I'll switch back over to the Simple Client application, and I've got main output from VDMX, and I can load it up into here. So a lot of other programs that are useful are like MadMapper. A lot of people use that for doing projection mapping, and that you can publish a VDMX feed, and it goes directly in there. I don't know, Sean, what are some other programs that people use with Siphon? They use Blendy VJ. I've seen people use that if they want to do like edge blending, and there's also Blendy Dome, which is like specialized projection mapping for domes.
I might just mention at this point that we haven't got Siphon installed on these laptops. So if people were wanting to play with it, we haven't got Siphon installed on that, but it is a free download, and you can tune lots of different things into VDMX and out of it with the free Siphon download later.
So Siphon, if you want to go to the website for it, it's vo2.siphon, and yeah, they've got a whole list of programs here that support it. And I think they've even got their little sample applications here. Yeah, right here. Download their simple pair. And another thing that we actually see a lot of people do with Siphon and VDMX is they'll have their own custom applications that they wrote with like open frameworks or Cinder or even processing, things where they're writing actual code and then publishing them out of Siphon, maybe sending OSC messages from a control surface in VDMX over to just control whatever parameters they need in real time. And if you need to trigger Siphon things, they show up in your import media window, and just like before, there's this whole category of Siphon, so you can choose them here and then, okay, trigger it, just like any other file. If some applications actually don't support Siphon, and so another example of things that you can do with VDMX is we've got this, quit the simple server, and we could even get rid of this Siphon output plugin. We won't linger on Siphon for too long. So let's go with Google Chrome. Google Chrome doesn't support Siphon. And there's no way of getting this video stream out to, if I load up Twitter and I've got my Twitter feed in Chrome or Safari, and I say, hey, I want this to actually be part of my visuals. One of the things that VDMX has is in the video input section, where you can set up all of your cameras. By default, the first tab over here is just called QuickTime Compatible Digitizers, like your webcam. If you have any Blackmagic hardware hooked up, it'll show up over here as well. So if you have like a mini recorder or something, it'll be there. There's this other one called Windows and Other Applications, and we call it, it's a window grabber. And you have to turn it on. It's not on by default because it uses a lot of CPU usage. But if you hit that, and it just gives you a list of all of your other open applications. So if I switch, here's Google Chrome, and I can actually see I've got this window. I hit Enable, and I get a little preview here. And then you could choose whether or not it's cropping on individual sides. So if you want, maybe I don't want the whole sidebar going visible, I can tab over a little bit, or I can just type in, okay, that looks like it's about 200 pixels over, 400 pixels over, 500, maybe, what's that? That's a lot of pixels over, right? Okay, 650 maybe. And maybe we want to be a little bit wider than this, so we'll maybe make it 800 pixels wide so we get more. Sometimes you have to finagle this a little bit just to get the right amounts. I guess these values are probably retinized screens. Cool, so we've got this range, and I'll make it 12. Let's just make it for 1280 by 720 then. Sounds good, right? So now I've got this 1280 by 720 feed from Chrome coming in, and I can actually just assign that to a layer now. So under Window Inputs, Google Chrome, and now that's part of my VDMX feed. And it's in over mode, and that doesn't actually support alpha channels, so we'll switch it into additive mode. And now as I scroll around in Chrome, I'll actually see that updated in VDMX. And another useful trick for this is like if you, I've done shows where like I have somebody doing live drawing in Photoshop, and they'll draw with whatever brushes they like, and we'll grab that window and pump it over to VDMX that way. So this has a few advantages and disadvantages over Siphon, or actually, so the one advantage is really that you don't have to have any specialized software to use it. The downside is it has higher CPU usage, and the windows actually have to be visible on screen. So if I hide Chrome right now, I actually lose that feed. It's not available anymore for me to use. When I go into video input section, Chrome just doesn't show up anymore. I get stuck on whatever the last frame from it was. But window inputs can kind of solve a lot of really weird situations that you run into when you want to get video feeds out of something that just doesn't, it's some weird application. Sometimes cameras have proprietary software. Sometimes they have, video generators that just don't have Siphon support for outputting. I've seen weird particle generator things that people want to use. Or sometimes if you're just doing like a VDMX like Keynote and you're trying to explain part of the interface of your computer to somebody else, if you have a Finder window that's open, even that shows up under there. So there's the Finder, and I could say, okay, I want, show another layer. Window inputs, Finder window, and now the Finder is part of my VDMX setup. I've seen also people do this with like like the terminal, they have like, top running in the terminal. You could have terminal, you can type the word top, and then you get this whole sort of like, I don't know, readout of what's going on your system. Maybe you want to feed that in there and look really cool. You could adjust the colors and do a nice hacker show, stuff like that. I guess the last thing I can sort of dive into is start doing some Quartz Composer stuff, because I bet a lot of people are interested in how all of that works. And you can do a lot of Quartz Composer stuff in VDMX. So let's start with, I'll make the new layer. VDMX comes with a bunch of like kind of standard Quartz Composer patches that you could use for learning from. And like I was saying before, you can use Quartz Composer patches either as sources, you can use them as effects, you can use them as, you can make your own composition modes using Quartz Composer, and you can actually make your own custom plugins that generate data sources and do other stuff using Quartz Composer. So like one of the actual sections in plugins, if you go down to the bottom here, it says QC-based plugins, and I've got these ones here that I've made over time. And some of them are just kind of very highly specific. I use them for one project, and other ones are a little bit more reusable. So if you want to add your own plugins or built-in sources or effects, go to the Help menu, and there's this option that says Open Assets folder in the Finder, and it'll open up this folder that has all of your kind of VDMX stuff in there. So in particular, like if you want to load a Quartz Composer effect that you downloaded off of the internet, or one that you've made yourself, or you want to modify one of the ones that we've created, there's the QC effects folder. You can open that up, and you'll just see there's a big list of effects here. So if you want to, modify, the color tint effect, you could just double click on it, and here's the color. Here's the whole code for that. It does the core image filter, and stuff like that. So for color tint, you'll see that there's this it's a really simple patch. There's just this core image filter, which just does this little bit of math here in this floating panel here. And then on the left, I've got these three objects here, which let me decide what my published values are for it. And if you load in that effect, what were we looking at? The color tint effect. So the color tint effect, it's under color adjustment. No, color effect. You ever get lost for looking for an effect under its categories? One of the sections in the workspace inspector is called assets, and it actually gives you like a searchable text field for effects. So I forgot where I put color tint. There. So I can just drag it in here. And actually you can even, from the workspace inspector, preview things before you add them to a layer. So if I want to see what color tint looks like on my live camera before I actually add it to the layer, I can do that here, and there's controls for it, and then I can just say, okay, once I find the settings I like, you could even save this as its own effect in there to load up. So let's see. Oh, I didn't actually add it, did I? Cool. So color tint, I could just drag it in that way as well. So if you have them, and so color tint has a gain slider and this color picker that, and those are the options. So color, gain, and this input image one is just automatically handles the actual video input from VDMX for that effect, and you need to have that in there for an effect to work. So it just says basically this is where the input stream comes in, and then go from there. Probably the easiest way to show off making Quartz Composer patches though are with sources. So if I wanted to just make we'll go to Quartz Composer, and I'll do a new patch completely from scratch. So I'll go to Basic Composition, and Sean, what do you like to do for a first Quartz Composer patch? Something with a cube, maybe?
Sure. A cube, some color effects, some audio reactivity.
Should we, yeah, we could do either bit. So Quartz Composer has a whole bunch of, if you want to just get video to display in Quartz Composer, it's got a whole bunch of, if you go into the library section up here, it's got a whole bunch of different categories for what you need, different object types. So some of them are like generators, and some of them, so if you want like a video generator, there's a generators category, similar like with VDMX. And then you would have, so if you want like just a color generator, you can have that, and it generates color So you basically say, I want it to be red, and then it makes a color red out of there. Some of these you need to do a little bit of clipping. You can also just like drag a movie file in. Oh, that's a happy movie. I don't want to do that one, right? Let's grab some other video file. Video, VJ, one of Jack's mud puddles. Cool. So you can actually just like drag a video file from the Finder into Quartz Composer. The most primitive object for displaying video is called a billboard or a sprite, and you can just drag those in from the library. And then once you just connect a patch cord, your video starts playing. So we usually don't recommend doing video playback in Quartz Composer if you're going to load in patches. I'm just showing this as a quick demonstration. So if you want like a video to play back, you just drop in a billboard. And sort of like with VDMX, you go to this, where's the floating panel? There's this like floating window that has all of the properties of whatever you've clicked on. So when you click on a movie, you've got the settings for that. If you click on a billboard and it's the thing that's inspected, you can go through and it's got its input settings and published inputs and outputs and stuff like that up there. So for starters, actually, let's just say we've got this, the very most basic thing. I'm going to just drop in a sprite. And so a sprite just gives you this like white square there. So let's just do the most simple thing. I'm going to have this square, and I'm going to make it so that we can just control the size of this, the size and color of this square. And maybe make it a rectangle. How about that? So for a sprite, if you go into its inspector, it's got rotation and position settings, and then it's got width and height options here, and then color. So if I adjust the width to 0.5 in that inspector, it makes a narrow cube, narrow rectangle rather. If I want to make any of these options available to use outside of that inspector, what I would do is right-click on the sprite object, and then it has this option for publish inputs and input splitter, insert input splitter. So input splitter is a special object in Quartz Composer that tells whatever host application to make a UI item for it. So I'm going to insert an input splitter for width, because that's what we want to control. And I'll right-click again and choose height, so we can control that. And lastly, I'll just right-click one more time and choose color. So now I can use these input splitters to adjust all of those settings. In order to make them visible in VDMX, I just have to do one more step, which is go to the publish inputs for each of these and type in what I want them to actually be called. So I'll just call them width and height, and right-click one more time, publish input, and choose color. And now I'm going to just save this patch, and I'll just call it my streaming work. I'll call it streaming rect. Perfect. So I've got the streaming rectangle, and when I say fit to the Finder, I've got actually a thumbnail because I'm still in 10.8 right now. And once you've got a Quartz Composer batch, you just drag it into your media bin and trigger it just like anything else. So I trigger it, and I get this cube, or this square rather, and it's playing on layer 1 right now. Oh, I guess I replaced my live camera. You guys want to see me again? Hey there, I'm back. And since layer 1 is actually in front of this, I get blocked out there. So let's look at the layer source controls. I'm going to open that up into its own window. And here we go. I've got a slider that adjusts the width, and a slider that adjusts the height, and I've got a color picker that lets me control what color it is. And this patch actually does support alpha channels, so it's a real-time generator. So if I switch this top layer to over mode, that cube, that rectangle actually blocks out whatever video is behind it. And I can adjust the opacity of it. I can make it slightly transparent at this point, whatever.
I might just ask at this point how many people have Quartz Composer experience in the class. Can we get a show of hands for people who use Quartz? So about 3 out of 12 of the people have used Quartz.
Okay. Okay. Are people generally interested in using Quartz Composer? Because it's a really great way of making... So aside from people who have used Quartz Composer before, who's actually interested in learning it as a means of making real-time generators and stuff?
Can you see the hands from New York going up?
So there's a bunch more hands than we're up for actually who knows it, right?
Yeah. But so we've got 27 minutes left, so I don't know if a compression course on Quartz is probably going to be the best use of time. We've got a couple of questions from the web stream to ask. They're pretty small though, but we've got question time here as well to deal with. And
oh, right. So we have 27 minutes, including a Q&A. So you guys want to switch to doing straight up Q&A now? Would that be better?
Unless you feel like there's things that you want to round out with the overall kind of structure of VDMX.
No, I could kind of go on these topics forever. So yeah, unless there are like specific little tricks that people want, maybe this would be a good time to go into questions and answers, and then I can throw in any other little tidbits that I come up with along the way.
David, I've got a question while you're talking about Quartz Composer. Throughout the years, it's sort of been favoured and not favoured, it seems, by Apple over the various different operating systems. What's the sort of status of it at the moment, do you know, and is it going to be kept going and all that sort of stuff?
I very much wish I knew the answer to that question. The only sort of response that I can give is that one of the reasons why earlier this year we kind of released, and I really didn't want to get into it because it's even more a little bit more complicated than even using Quartz Composer, is we started introducing this idea of our own effects format called ISF for making shader-based effects. So that's why we have all of these fragment shaders in there now. And like we even remade our layer mask effect as like a shader. You could open it up and actually see all the code for it now. And part of that was we're not sure what the future of Quartz Composer is, and we've been trying to insulate ourselves from that as much as possible by making our own effects format that people can start working with. I can say that they haven't deprecated it yet, so it will be around at least in whatever the next operating system is. So we've got at least another year of it around. And you know, any sort of experience that you pick up learning Quartz Composer, a lot of that information will translate over to other like node-based programming languages kind of implicitly. So even if they do kill it off in a year or two from now, by then hopefully things like Vuo will be further along. And I've even seen some other node-based ones. I've heard that VVVV might be moving to the Mac OS in a year or two. I don't know if that'll actually happen. But I know that the Quartz Composer community is kind of bigger than ever, especially since there's this big Facebook released their whole set of free plugins and add-ons for Quartz Composer that I've heard people are using, and it makes it more stable. I can say that there's like a memory leak with core image on certain graphics cards in 10.9 that Apple hasn't fixed yet, and that's actually kind of a bigger concern for us right now. Like it affects every application that uses core image on the NVIDIA graphics cards. If you follow me on Twitter, you've probably seen me ranting about it before.
Yeah, right. Okay, that's great. Thanks.
I might read you out a couple of questions that have been tallied in the YouTube comments. One was mentioning about, do you have any good tips for a good VDMX and Max jitter workflow?
Yeah, so there is a tutorial on using VDMX with Max already up on the site. And typically, I think the answer to that is just using OSC messages. I think it's do I have Max on here? I might have only demo mode, so I might not be able to show you. Trial is expired. I think it's JIT-net send and JIT-net receive are their OSC objects. And you just kind of make it kind of depends on what you're doing, actually. I would say that suggestions, though, would be to make a control surface plugin in VDMX, and then whatever parameters you're going to want to control in your Mac setup, add those. So if you want to have a slider to control the amount of one parameter, and then add a button to control another parameter. And then in the UI inspector, you can specify what all of these are sending to. So if you need to send this out, you would just send it to OSC. And then you want to send it to localhost. So you go into the VDMX preferences, and then you would go under output ports, create new, and it defaults to 127.0.0.1. And that just lets messages get sent around between applications. And then you would just set this option here to whatever the port you had your JIT-net send, or net, sorry, your JIT-net receive would be this port number. And then you would just say, okay, OSC output port, and then that would be received by, oh, I could show this off using like the OSC test application. So there's this program you could download that we have up on our GitHub page called OSC test app. And it's just kind of like the COM display plugin in VDMX, only it's a standalone application, so you can use it to see whatever OSC information is coming in or out of your computer. It's really useful running alongside of Macs if you're sending things, or even if you're using like a touch OSC setup. This actually works with Bonjour. So this actually, if I want to send to my test application, I can just pick it from the menu there. And now as I adjust the slider, you'll see these OSC values coming in the background there. And they're being listed as from VDMX /X, but you could type in whatever name you want them to be received by on the receiving end. And then Max, you would just use, I guess it's the route object for routing, or a string compare for figuring out what addresses you want to route them through. There's kind of a bunch of different ways you could do it on the Mac side. But the idea would be, for every parameter you want to control in Max, you would make a control surface with whatever UI items you want to control. And then, I kind of mentioned this before, but if you don't want your numbers to be range 0 to 1, you can put in a custom range up here and then choose not send normalized over there. One of the really useful things about the control surface plugin is once you've kind of got it set up, if you're using a lot of different jitter patches, you might want to have like a button specifically that like turns rendering on and off for that patch so that you can disable it during a part of your set and then come back in later on. Another thing along those lines that's really useful in the control surface setup is you can customize the layout. So you go into the inspector and you hit this custom UI option, and then there's this edit UI toggle. And when you click on an item, instead of toggling it, you actually get these sort of these editor controls. So if you just want to have like a very highly really tight sort of setup, you can minimize there. And now this is my, got a button next to a slider as opposed to a slider on top of a button or whatever. So customizing your UI surface, and then you just have this little window here that sends your OSC messages off to your jitter patch. And then you use Siphon for receiving them back in VDMX. And I would recommend, adding your Siphon feeds, especially if you're using multiple ones, add them into a media bin so that you can trigger them just like any other clip.
Thanks, David.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd ask Casey here, who's used Jitter a bit, if he had any questions you wanted to ask specifically about Jitter and VDMX, or no? Okay, thanks. Another question someone had was, do you have any, will I have a good or a bad experience if I'm using VDMX on a Hackintosh? I think officially the response would be yes, you'll have a good time. And it will...
So I'll say this because I kind of have avoided using Hackintoshes because I know that they... we have to have one of every Mac on hand in the office for like testing purposes. This week I was helping a friend of mine out on a project and they were using Hackintosh. And the biggest problem that I ran into with them was audio interfaces. Audio interfaces seem to be totally wonky when it comes to that. And none of the built-in cards on the machine worked at all. So we ended up having to use like a webcam that had a built-in microphone in order to get audio analysis working. And I think that there was some weirdness with some of the USB ports on there, but I couldn't really pinpoint exactly what it was. So beyond that, it was a totally fine experience. But personally, I absolutely love the new Retina MacBook Pros. They're it's the best laptop I've ever owned, and I've been doing this for a long time. So, yeah.
On that note, your new laptop is running Mavericks. A bunch of people are having trouble with that around the place. One comment in the questions was, HAP uses up a lot of space. It's great, but as far as alternatives, be it AIRC, this person's having some trouble with, they used to use Photo JPEG, but now it's crashing a lot with Mavericks on Mac. Wondering if there's any alternatives other than HAP, AIC, or Photo JPEG for your recommendations?
No, it's just those recommendations, but I can say that there was, if you're using specifically like 10.9.0, there was some weird specifically a photo JPEG like system-wide problem that I think Apple actually fixed in 10.9.1. And when Mavericks first came out, we actually eventually found a workaround for it on our end that I think fixed it. So I think it's actually, we haven't seen that in a while where people were having photo JPEG problems. If you're having photo JPEG problems and you're still running, and you're running 10, I guess 10.9.2 actually just dropped. So if you're still having trouble on 10.9.2 with photo JPEG, you should send me an email because it should work totally fine at this point. I will say that every once in a while, when I'm looking through the crash logs, I'll encounter people who literally just have one or two video files that are like literally corrupt media files that cause problems. And when you run into that problem, there's like almost no way of knowing it other than you get a crash when you happen to be playing one particular file, and then you like go to open it in QuickTime Player just to preview it, and you get to the same point in that movie and it happens to crash QuickTime Player also, and you're like, oh, that file is just totally bogus. And sadly that does happen, and there's like no way for us to detect it and know about it in advance. But that isn't always the case. So yeah, if you're ever, and this goes for like I was saying before, if you're ever running into any problems that seem consistent, please send us an email or hit us up in the report bug thing, because once something seems kind of repeatable, it's easier for us to track down. But no, Photo JPEG, AIC, and HAP are kind of what you want to stick with.
Thanks. I've got a couple more, 3 or 4 more questions from YouTube that I'll add up, but I just wanted to see if anyone in the room wanted to ask any, especially we haven't had any questions from this side of the room at all. We got Bob Zeal, who makes the visible plugins, and he's going to ask you a question now.
I was just curious, it's just 2 of you there. I was just curious about your software development methodology, because it seems like quite a big project and you're pumping out so many builds so often. Just what's it like working with such a small team?
That's a very good question. So the last year, I've been focusing a lot more on doing tutorials and things like that for the website, and that's actually freed up Ray to work a lot more on programming, which has been kind of a good mix, because before we would both juggle both of those tasks, kind of, and it slowed us down a lot, switching gears. So I think, especially in the last year, we've actually been able to crank out a lot of new stuff, just because I've taken a lot more of the bureaucracy stuff off of Ray's plate, and that's been working pretty well. But we also we like to work a lot, I think, is kind of the answer. And the other answer to that is we do work with freelancers from time to time, specifically to work on individual features. So HAP came about as a collaboration with Tom Butterworth, who just emailed us and said, hey, I kind of want to make this open source video codec. Would you guys want to sponsor it and work with me on it? And we said, of course. And we loved the idea of it being open source, so that was kind of a no-brainer. And then sometimes we'll add big new features like wave clock. We didn't really code wave clock. We licensed that algorithm from Wavesum, and then we spent like a month kind of fine-tuning and integrating it into VDMX. But yeah, and we kind of focused on building a very strong foundation of reusable reusable code. So, and a lot of that is actually in the VV open source project. All of our MIDI and OSC code is available, and that's actually made it a lot stronger because we were able to compartmentalize things. And now, when we have to make something new in VDMX, a lot of our code base is very, very standard and makes it really easy for us to make new plugins and things like that that integrate with everything else very well. And when we have a new idea, what we do try to do is we spend a lot of time just thinking about how a new feature will get integrated everywhere, so that when we put a very simple toggle in somewhere, it might get added in 10 places and it becomes, ubiquitous and, I don't know, extends the overall functionality, and you can come up with a million different ways of working. But yeah, I think we just like to work a lot. I think that's kind of the answer. And we get a lot of great feedback from our users about what they would like to see in the future.
Cool, thanks. couple of questions from the YouTube comments. Someone was looking for you to release a template for the Newmark Orbit.
Oh, I bought an Orbit a week or two ago. It's a really fun controller. I started working on a template for it. I'll do one soon.
And
one of the things I really loved about that, I was just having trouble coming up with. There are all of these different page toggles on it. And I got through like 2 of them, and I was like, I don't know what else to assign all of these things to. And very often, making a setup is a very personalized thing. I come up with like half of the stuff being like, oh, this is really generic and useful stuff, and then the second half of it should totally be just filled in by the person actually using it.
Thanks. It looked like a fun controller. I saw the video of it. Someone else was asking, when are you going to release a mirror effect that does horizontal and vertical mirroring?
Oh, actually, I just made an ISF version of Mirror. Where did I put it? Distortion effect, distortion, mirror, FS. I did the horizontal in there. So next update, I hope this is what they were looking for, but...
Yeah, that sounds like it probably is.
Cool. So yeah, I've actually been trying to recreate and redo a lot of the standard effects as ISF effects. So yeah, you'll see some more of those in there. But yeah, the mirror one was really easy to do. That'll be in the next update.
I'll ask a question. What's the best practice for blend modes? I know you've got 3 different types of blend modes at the moment, and I have varying degrees of success with either CPU usage or remembering the positions of them. If I change from one blend mode to another and then I come back again, particularly if I've got kind of custom-made quartz ones, VDMX won't remember the settings, so I'll have to start from scratch and customize them each time, or I set up a control surface, but then I've always got to realign it. And with the older the comp mode, let me just look at it again just a sec. With the core image ones, I understand that they're slower, but they seem to have maybe, to my eyes, a better crossfade. So if you go across, it's consistent, as I would expect from going from 0 to 1. But when I go to the GLSL modes, some of the blend modes are a bit sporadic, or they change really close to the end.
So I'll do those in a couple of different orders, so that's a few different questions. So the first thing to mention is that with composition modes, you basically have 2 different big switches. So the best performance that you'll get is if you have OpenGL add or OpenGL over selected. And when you have, so in VDMX, one of the things is you can have groups of layers. So I can have layer 1 and layer 2 grouped, and then these other layers that exist outside of that group. So group 1 renders on top of layers 3 and 4. Within a particular group, all of the layers either need to be in OpenGL add over mode, or they can be in one of the more specialized modes, which let you actually do the composition modes. So if I switch, this from OpenGL additive to GLSL additive, it actually switches whatever other layers are in that group to being in GLSL mode as well. But it won't affect anything else in other groups. So it's kind of an important thing to note, is OpenGL mode is absolutely the fastest that things will get, but you're limited to just additive and over. And things have to be consistent within a group. It totally switches into a different rendering mode in those cases. So then within the sort of more advanced options, you've got core image, Quartz Composer, which lets you make more transition-based stuff, and then you've got GLSL modes. The GLSL modes do tend to be the fastest for most situations. I would have to actually try what you described about the fade-out curves, because it looks like, let's see, I'm going to just leave addition at 33% there, and then switch it to this. And actually, those look the same. You might have to send me screenshots of side by side.
Yeah, I can do that. I've just noticed that when I switch back to using core image, I was like, oh, okay, the fade is moving much smoother the way I expect. Often it doesn't. In some particular cases, I don't remember which particular blend modes, but it won't fade down until it gets to like 90% across. It does that right at the end, whereas other blend modes from GSL, SL work fine, but just particular modes, and that's kind of weird for mixing.
Oh, yeah. So sometimes when some of the modes for GLSL, they actually use like they're like Photoshop blend modes essentially. So they're not always doing like straight composition. Like if you're using the hue blend mode, I think it actually uses the pixel values of one to just define the hue a hue shift for the layer on top of it, and that's kind of some Photoshop composition modes work that way. And I guess they might just look pretty in VDMX, but essentially things, I don't know, you'll have to send me side-by-side screenshots.
I'll send you something else. I think something that would be more interesting to people maybe, rather than that question, is one that's come through in the comments is from Jim Bob.
But I have one more thing to talk about there. Hold on, I've got one more thing that you're going to love, which is you were saying the composition modes would lose their settings for you.
Yep.
So go into the Workspace Inspector under the Asset section, and then there's this menu that says Asset Type. If you go under that, it defaults to video effects, but one of them is called Composition Modes. And if you go under Composition Modes, you could do like, oh, sorry, clicked off. So you can go under all QC modes, and then you could actually duplicate one of these, and it creates like a virtual version of it that has, you know, whatever different settings you want for it. I guess circle white might not be the best example. What's one that has, here we go. So let's say ripple between those two things. So in the asset section, you can also even preview what these composition modes look like. So let's say I have like the ripple and I want one that comes out of the top corner, or I want this one to always come out of the top corner. I could do duplicate, and now I've got, this comes out of the top right corner. And now when I go over to layers under composition modes, I would have ripple copy, and that one actually does what are the settings? Composition UI. It would have. Did I not do that right? Thought I did it right. Oh, I didn't save it right. There, save. Switch to a different one, and then Quartz Composer ripple. Yeah. So now the ripple is at that top.
Okay. Yeah,
corner
that's
there.
really useful.
Yeah, so you can make variations on your composition modes, and then it's sort of like a virtual copy. You have the one patch loaded, and then you go into the asset section. You can make, multiple different versions of the same one, and that way you can use them across projects. That was kind of the idea there, is you can make composition modes, and even this applies for like the text sources and image sources options, and same with effects. You can like take an effect and make it so that I want, an X rotation where it's automatically synced to measure position. Oh, I need to, sorry. Make new effects chain, whatever, add an effect to it, like 3D rotate. Where was 3D rotate? 3D rotate. So yeah, I've got 3D rotate there now, and now I've got my custom effects chain, and that's, my auto rotate chain. And now I can just go to like layers and say I want my auto rotate chain, and it gives me that effect chain with that parameter synced to it already. So making assets is kind of a larger scale thinking. Once you're working across multiple projects and you want to think about your reusable stuff, that's where the assets come in.
Cool, thank you, that's helpful. Jim Bob Hunter, you probably recognize from the forums, he wrote in asking if there's any plans to make the mapping side of VDMX more comprehensive. And also, can you recommend the best way to edge blend from VDMX?
So we've actually been talking a lot about projection mapping recently. So I think that's kind of the number one requested, like, larger feature. So we've been talking about different ways of integrating that into the app, mostly because, so if you use an app like MadMapper, it makes sense because workflow-wise that it's this sort of thing that happens after all of your video stuff happens. But I know that a lot of the kind of limitations that people have in that that they would kind of expect VDMX to cover are like the ability to switch between mappings and things like that. We've also been kind of debating whether or not like mapping should be as a thing that happens as part of your like advanced setup, or whether or not people need to actually be able to do it on a per layer or per group basis. So we've been talking a lot about different possible workflows and talking with a lot of people who are doing mapping projects to see how it might actually make sense in VDMX. Because sometimes it seems like it is this second part of the process of just your output settings, and other times we could actually see people wanting to be able to have far more control over it the way that they're used to with VDMX. So it's a thing that we're thinking about a lot lately is projection mapping and ways we could integrate it, some features. And what was the second part of that question? Sorry, I forgot.
Edge blends. How do you recommend edge blends in VDMX?
I usually just use, the few times I've had to do it, I use Blendy VJ, but actually edge blending is something we've also been talking about as sort of in the same field as projection mapping. If we do add some projection mapping support, more in-depth projection mapping support, we might, along with that, add edge blending at the same time because they're kind of very closely intertwined ideas when you're dealing with projection. So that was another thing we were actually on the topic of projection mapping is if we do projection mapping, we probably also kind of need to do edge blending in order to make it a fully comprehensive feature set on that. We don't want to like cop out.
So we can expect that in April, is that right?
Oh God, no. I don't know what our next turnaround cycle is, but yeah, probably. I don't know. Don't bother me.
And so,
but it is
when is VDMX coming out of beta?
I like to say that the B stands for build. Ray likes to still call it beta. I don't think it'll ever come out of beta. We're always just going to keep working on it and improving it. It'll come out of beta when we start working on VDMX 6.
Thank you very much for your time, David. It's 3 o'clock in Australia. We might, if anyone has another question, we might get it. But thanks very much for an in-depth exploration.
Yeah, I hope I kind of touched on there were a lot of things I kind of skipped over, but I hope I got a lot of the meat stuff for you guys. I would be happy to answer another quick question if there was one more. If not, then I'll just say goodbye.
Yep, no, that's it. Thank you very much for your time. It's 10 o'clock in New York, so I guess go out and, I don't know, eat pizza or something.
It's 11 o'clock, so I might have to...
oh, so it is.
But I still have my options for pizza, thank you. Cool. So,
okay.
Yeah, have a nice day, everyone. Talk to you later.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
All right, and thanks to Sean for hosting today. Quick round of applause.